case of Esmeralda Riches. Esmeralda Riches was born on August 23, 2006. Little is known about her childhood, but it is understood that she grew up in a loving family with her older sister. The family ran a small supermarket, where Esmeralda spent most of her time before attending the Agricultural Polytechnic Institute. She aspired to pursue higher education and dreamed of a modeling career, which she often showcased on social media. Esmeralda has an attractive appearance, giving her a great chance of success in this field. Esmeralda regularly shares funny and dancing videos on her social media, clearly enjoying her online presence and being in front of the camera. Her friends describe her as cheerful and kind, always ready to help others, which makes her popular. Unlike most teenagers, Esmeralda preferred to stay at home and invite her friends over rather than go out to various places. However, in the weeks leading up to the tragic incident, she suddenly began spending more time with her friends outside the house. This change in behavior confused her mother and sister. Her sister even suggested to their mother that they set some boundaries for Esmeralda, but her mother thought this was typical teenage behavior and did not see it as a cause for concern. However, the real problem was not her friends but her teacher, 30-year-old John Kelly Martinez. John had begun his teaching career after passing his teacher exam and started his probationary period in June 2022 at the academy where Esmeralda was in her final year. He initially taught mathematics, but later volunteered to teach physical education, working with all groups, including Esmeralda's class. At that time, John was married with 2 daughters. He was known to be responsible and considerate, getting along with most of the students, and he was especially close to Esmeralda. At first, John and Esmeralda's relationship was merely that of a teacher and student. However, over time, John developed a special interest in her and gained her trust. One day during recess, John sat down next to Esmeralda and her friends and began asking strange questions, such as who the girls lived with, whether they had boyfriends. Unfortunately, the students did not notice John's strange behavior. Soon, he began inviting Esmeralda to meet him outside of school, often bringing other students along to avoid attracting attention. On February 12, 2023, John planned to go for a walk along the beach that evening with his nephew and 3 of Esmeralda's friends. However, since Esmeralda's parents did not allow her to go out at night, she was worried that her mother would not permit her to join them. To resolve this issue, she asked John to pick her up and help convince her mother. John agreed and arrived at Esmeralda's house around 7:30 p.m. in his black Honda, accompanied by his nephew and 3 friends. They went inside to talk to Esmeralda's mother about allowing her to go for a walk to a nearby horse show. At first, her mother was hesitant. However, after considering that Esmeralda would be with her teacher and classmates, Esmeralda's mother finally agreed to let her go. She did not know that this decision would have serious consequences for her daughter. That evening, Esmeralda's father returned home from church and found that Esmeralda was missing. When he asked his wife where she was, Esmeralda's mother explained that she had allowed Esmeralda to go for a walk. Esmeralda's father became angry, but she assured him that Esmeralda was with her teacher and classmates. As the night wore on and it became 11 p.m., Esmeralda still had not returned. Esmeralda's father called her, and surprisingly, she answered immediately, saying that she was on her way back from the beach and would be home in 10 minutes. Her father went outside to wait for her because she did not have her keys. A few minutes later, Esmeralda arrived home, accompanied by a friend and John. After seeing the girls off, John left immediately. Esmeralda's parents found her looking worried and pale, almost too weak to walk. Her friend helped her into the room and laid her down. Worried about her condition, her mother asked if Esmeralda had been drinking. Esmeralda replied that she had only had a sip of wine, which upset her mother. Esmeralda's father began scolding her for coming home late. During the argument, Esmeralda got up to go to the bathroom. Her mother then noticed a red stain. When her mother asked about it, Esmeralda said that she had just started her period. Her mother found this strange because she believed her daughter had finished her period a few days earlier. Nevertheless, she chose not to question the matter further. On the morning of February 13th, Esmeralda sent a text message to her friend asking for help, saying that she was bleeding. Around 6 a.m., Esmeralda's mother noticed that her daughter had not yet woken up for school. She knocked on Esmeralda's bedroom door, expecting her to wake up, but there was no answer. Worried, her parents entered the room and were horrified to find it empty and the bed covered in blood. They rushed into the bathroom and discovered Esmeralda. When they ran closer to check, her parents found that Esmeralda was dead. Overwhelmed with grief, they called the police. The police arrived, and around 8 a.m., Esmeralda's body was taken to the National Institute of Forensic Medicine for an autopsy to determine the cause of death. Her family was shocked, not knowing the details, but they suspected that something terrible had happened the night she went out. They discovered several text messages on Esmeralda's phone to her friend, indicating that a hard object had been inserted into her genitals, along with a voice message asking for help. At the time, the family was unaware of Esmeralda's relationship with John, but they quickly identified him as the prime suspect, prompting an investigation into the events of that night. The parents of 3 teenage girls who were with Esmeralda that night turned over their cell phones to the police to assist in the investigation. The police found several text messages from Esmeralda's friend, who drove her home, indicating that Esmeralda had begun bleeding from the 5 pills John had provided to induce an abortion. Esmeralda's friends urged her to go to the hospital, but she refused. Text messages showed that she had passed out several times while in John's car on the way home. The girls' phones also displayed messages from John asking about Esmeralda's condition. On the morning of Tuesday, February 14th, John was arrested and taken to the police station as the prime suspect in Esmeralda's death. The Department of Education suspended him for 90 days without pay to allow the investigation to proceed. During the search of John's home, his nephew was also arrested for attempting to conceal clothing, specifically the shirt, pants, and shoes that John had been wearing that night. Meanwhile, the chief prosecutor interviewed the 3 girls who were with Esmeralda. Their testimony was crucial for the police in piecing together the events of that night. They reported that they initially drove around the area, but at some point, John stopped at a store where he bought some beer and pills. When he returned to the car, he told Esmeralda to move from the back seat to the front. They then drove over 60 kilometers to the beach. John poured beer into a thermos and added some unidentified pills before giving them to Esmeralda. She indicated that she did not know what was in the thermos besides the beer. When they reached the beach, everyone got out of the car except for John and Esmeralda. After about half an hour, John called the group to say it was time to head back. On the way, Esmeralda asked to stop at a gas station so she could use the restroom. When her friends joined her, they noticed that her clothes were covered in blood. Everyone rushed to help Esmeralda. The gas station manager saw the situation and informed John of what was happening, causing him to panic and say that they might be in trouble and needed to take Esmeralda home. Her friends decided to buy her a new outfit. As they drove to Esmeralda's house a few miles away, they needed to stop at a friend's house to change Esmeralda's clothes again. The prosecutor's office obtained surveillance camera footage from the gas station where the girls said they had stopped that night. The video confirms that the car had indeed stopped there, and the manager corroborated the girls' claim. A few days later, forensic experts examined the area and found traces of human blood where the girls had indicated. Police also discovered another stop at a pharmacy at 10:21 p.m., where they obtained surveillance camera footage and John's purchase receipt. The receipts showed that he had purchased water, medicine, and disposable towels for the woman. While the investigation was still ongoing, Esmeralda's funeral was held. Friends and family said their final goodbyes, remembering her as a fun-loving and loving young woman. Her sister stood by the coffin, deeply saddened. Esmeralda was buried in the city cemetery according to Christian tradition. During the burial, her parents expressed deep sorrow at their loss. They lamented that their daughter had not confided in them about her troubles or sought help, believing that if she had, she might still be alive. Esmeralda's sister mentioned that she had frequently asked Esmeralda about her relationship with the teacher, but Esmeralda always denied any relationship. Their father stated that he had never met John before that tragic night and insisted that if he had been home, he would have prevented this situation from occurring. There are many theories about Esmeralda's death. Some believe she died of a heart attack, while others think it was due to blood loss from the abortion pill that John gave her after their encounter. These speculations were put to rest when the autopsy results were released. The report revealed that Esmeralda died from a ruptured vagina, which resulted in severe bleeding and hemorrhagic shock due to the abuse. The hemorrhagic shock eventually damaged Esmeralda's heart, preventing it from pumping enough blood. The doctor who performed the autopsy insisted on conducting toxicology tests to rule out pregnancy. At the time of her death, her family was confident that the results would be negative, believing that Esmeralda and John's encounter that night was their first and last. The family's attorney stated that regardless of the test results, they would seek a more thorough investigation. Esmeralda's family conducted their own tests, which returned different results than those of the state medical examiner based on evidence collected by the police on February 20th. As a result, the prosecutor's office sought to charge John and also requested the arrest of his nephew, Rubio Murillo Martinez, as an accomplice. The prosecution's theory was that John drugged Esmeralda that night to assault her, causing injuries that eventually led to her death hours later. Rubio allegedly knew about the incident. However, the attorneys for John and his nephew argued that the prosecutors did not have enough evidence to hold both men in custody and requested their release. The defense attempted to blame Esmeralda's parents for her death, claiming they were angry that Esmeralda had been with John and his nephew that night. After reviewing the evidence presented at trial, the judge ordered John to be held in a correctional rehabilitation center for 12 months before the trial. Rubio was required to report regularly to the police station. Additionally, the girls who were with Esmeralda that night were summoned to assess their involvement and potential punishment. This court decision helped to defuse tensions, but the lawyer warned that Esmeralda's body might need to be exhumed for further forensic examination. A few days later, the case was again thrust into the spotlight when an audio recording, allegedly made by one of John's daughters, began circulating online. In this recording, the daughter defended her father, claiming that Esmeralda was not abused because she willingly got into John's car. Meanwhile, John's wife faced a separate scandal after she sold her husband's car for about $14,000 shortly after his arrest. On March 28th, the prosecutor's office confirmed that John's wife had sold the car and expected to receive the remaining payment later. Police also seized a handgun that had been sold to John by a woman. John's wife was arrested on suspicion of involvement in the crime and concealing evidence, but was released hours later due to a lack of evidence against her. The investigation continues. In the following months, police worked to gather evidence to confirm John's involvement in Esmeralda's death. During a second search of John's home, they discovered a box of birth control pills containing levonorgestrel, the same active ingredient found in Esmeralda's body. Additionally, brown women's pants, a dark blue blouse, and a white napkin were collected from the house. Several pieces of blue plastic bags and other items were collected and sent for forensic examination. Subsequent analysis determined that the clothing belonged to Esmeralda. On November 24, 2023, judge ordered that John be tried as the sole defendant in the case concerning Esmeralda's death. The judge dismissed the charges of illegal possession of a weapon, leaving him to be tried only for the charges of deprivation of life and abuse related to Esmeralda. A judge from the Superior Court will decide John's sentence. In contrast, all charges against Rubio Murillo Martinez were dismissed due to insufficient evidence. The prosecution and Esmeralda's family lawyers have expressed their intention to appeal this decision. The trial was originally scheduled to begin on January 9, 2024, but was postponed. The hearing finally began on January 15th, with the press barred from attending. The hearing commenced with the reading of the indictment, followed by testimony from witnesses. Esmeralda's parents were the first to speak. They expressed their deep love for their daughter and their immense grief at losing her. Esmeralda's father directed his comments at John, emphasizing that John had relied on his role as an educator and child advocate. After the emotional testimony from Esmeralda's family, John spoke. He tries to play the victim, admitting to being intimate with Esmeralda but insisting it was consensual. He also claimed that he had brought her home alive and unharmed. The prosecution argued that Esmeralda died as a result of fatal injuries inflicted by John. To support their case, the prosecution presented 40 pieces of evidence, including witness statements, audio and video material collected during the investigation, and photos and videos of Esmeralda with John, as well as Esmeralda's autopsy report. After all the evidence was presented, the prosecution and Esmeralda's family attorney requested a prison sentence for John. They also attempted to add an additional charge, alleging that he had committed the crime of torturing a minor. However, this charge was dismissed by the judge. On March 14, 2024, the court found John Kelly Martinez guilty and sentenced him to 20 years in prison. He was ordered to pay Esmeralda's family $33,000 in restitution, along with a $3,400 fine. After the verdict, John apologized to Esmeralda's parents and the public for his actions. Although no sentence could bring Esmeralda back, the verdict brought relief to her family. They expressed their gratitude to everyone involved in the investigation and trial and stated that they were satisfied with the outcome. Esmeralda's mother described her daughter as a cheerful and happy girl. After her death, her mother tried to call her many times, struggling to accept the loss. Esmeralda's father used to wake her up every morning, but now he will never have that chance again. Both of Esmeralda's parents pray for the strength to overcome their grief, but they find it difficult to forgive John. Esmeralda's tragic story has deeply affected many people. Her life ended, highlighting the importance of maintaining appropriate boundaries in the teacher-student relationship. The case of Bianca Edmonds. Bianca Edmonds was the second of 4 children, with 2 brothers and 1 sister. When Bianca was young, her father took a job with a mining company, which kept him away from home for long periods. This created tension in the family, as her mother wanted him to spend more time with them, but he could not quit his job. This eventually led to their separation. Bianca's mother later remarried another man, who adopted Bianca and her siblings. As a result, Bianca was often referred to by her stepfather's surname, Edmonds. This did not bother the family or Edmonds much, as she had little contact with her biological father in her early years. However, as she grew older and finished school, she reconnected with her biological father, and they developed a close relationship. After completing her secondary education, Bianca joined the Australian Navy. Unfortunately, a year later, she injured her back during training, which led to her being discharged for health reasons. After recovering, she worked various jobs in the retail industry but found it difficult to hold down a permanent position. In 2007, she gave birth to her first son after starting a relationship with a man. However, the man was not interested in family life, and they eventually broke up. By this time, Bianca had matured and knew what she wanted in life. She longed for reliable support and a comfortable lifestyle. In early 2012, shortly after turning 26, she met Michael Capo Siena, who was 35. Their relationship progressed rapidly, and they got married that same year. At the end of 2012, Bianca became pregnant again, and on June 3, 2013, she gave birth to a son. Although their relationship progressed quickly, it was toxic from the start. Michael often complained that Bianca was too controlling. The couple argued frequently, and shortly after the birth of their son, they decided to divorce. In early 2015, Bianca met Glenn Cassidy, a 48-year-old man, through a dating app. As usual, Bianca acted quickly. She appreciated Glenn's gentle nature, which suited her desire to be proactive in the relationship. Their initial online flirtation quickly turned into a real-life meeting and intimacy. Although Glenn was 20 years older than Bianca and was married with 2 children from a previous marriage, their similar life experiences seemed to help them connect quickly. In February 2016, they got married. Meanwhile, Bianca faced a number of personal challenges, most notably a custody battle with her ex-husband, Michael. Bianca's second husband, Michael, was initially not very involved in their son's life and often refused to see him. However, things changed when Michael entered a new relationship, achieved financial stability, and decided to spend more time with his son, who was then 9 months old. In March 2014, Michael requested visitation rights for his son. This led to a number of disputes, with Bianca accusing her ex-husband of being toxic and unfit to be a father. Michael decided to file a lawsuit against Bianca. By August 2015, after several court hearings, he was granted visitation rights, but with strict restrictions. He could only see his son in a neutral location under supervision, with 2-hour visits in Melbourne, a 2-hour drive from where Michael lived. This arrangement caused significant inconvenience for Bianca. She was unhappy that Michael was still interfering in their son's life, and she wanted to sever the relationship but could not find a way to do so. Unfortunately, the situation did not improve. Michael decided to take legal action again, seeking to increase the time and frequency of his visitation with his son and to remove the supervision requirement. This frustrated Bianca even more, leading to numerous arguments that sometimes escalated into physical confrontations. Michael's girlfriend described Bianca as a toxic person who tried to limit Michael's communication with his son out of anger. She said that Michael had changed his mind and wanted to reconnect with the child, and that he was legally entitled to do so. Michael's girlfriend portrayed him as a devoted family man with a kind personality. On the other hand, Glenn, who was in a relationship with Bianca, viewed Michael as a toxic and cruel person who could pose a threat to his son. Bianca frequently expressed her concerns about Michael to Glenn, claiming that he had threatened to kidnap her son. Bianca also attempted to manipulate her son psychologically by telling him that Michael, his biological father, was a bad person, but this tactic did not have the desired effect. Instead, she began to manipulate Glenn, using him as her main tool. Tensions in the family escalated, largely due to Bianca's provocations. She refused to be intimate with her husband unless he agreed to the idea of her ex-husband Michael's death. Over time, their relationship deteriorated. Bianca began to pressure and belittle Glenn, calling him a coward for not dealing with Michael and for not helping her. Initially, Glenn took her words as a joke, but over time, he began to seriously consider killing Michael due to the constant pressure he faced when his wife suggested planning the action. Glenn had written a fairly basic list of important points by hand. He wanted to shoot his enemy and then find a way to dispose of the body. In addition, Glenn's notes were full of spelling errors, highlighting his difficulties with writing. Bianca had received support from her husband, and she prepared him to commit the crime. Glenn desperately wanted to have a child with her, and her manipulation regarding intimacy worked. The couple, who had difficulty conceiving, shared their struggles with their friends. Bianca cleverly convinced Glenn that after Michael died, he would definitely have an heir. After this plan was documented, they began to prepare and execute it step by step. They searched for the best location for an ambush and created a map of the area where Michael lived with his new girlfriend. Bianca's knowledge of the layout of Michael's house helped her create a detailed plan, including the locations of doors and windows. They were very thorough in their preparations. They even mapped out the locations of streetlights and nearby houses with barking dogs. Bianca was eager to proceed and urged that Michael be killed as soon as possible. However, each time they set a date, things went wrong, causing delays. Glenn visited Michael's house several times to assess the entrances and exits of various streets. During these visits, he would call Bianca to discuss any problems that were interfering with their plans. He often expressed frustration that Michael was not home at the scheduled time, as he seemed to be working late or socializing with friends. The attackers communicated in code and referred to the area around Michael's house as the workplace. Glenn often stayed late, waiting for the target of the attack. Despite Bianca's encouragement, Glenn remained anxious and uncertain. Bianca employed her main tactic, intimacy, assuring him that once Michael was dead, he would have everything he wanted. Later, for reasons unknown, the police obtained a recording of their conversation. In response, Glenn installed a call recording app on his cell phone, possibly suspecting that he was being manipulated and wanting to protect himself in case things went wrong. Regardless, this did not absolve him of guilt for the shooting that followed. While carrying out this heinous plan, Bianca was supposed to be on vacation with Glenn's mother. The destination was on the other side of Australia, likely chosen to provide Bianca with an alibi that would convince the police of her innocence. On March 11, 2016, she prepared for the trip and spoke to Glenn about their plans. The next day, March 12, Glenn drove 170 kilometers to Michael's house. At 12:23 p.m., he sent another text message, expressing his love for her and speaking angrily about Michael. Around 1 p.m. that same day, Glenn drove to the road leading to Michael's house. He reiterated his love for Bianca and his willingness to carry out his plan. During this time, Glenn set up an ambush, positioning himself to see the front door of the house. When Michael and Silvana Silva, his girlfriend, arrived home, they settled in to watch a movie. At 7:18 p.m., Silvana looked out the window and saw a man get out of his car and walk toward their house empty-handed. Recognizing him, she told Michael, feeling confused. This was odd since they lived far from Bianca and her new husband, leaving them puzzled as to how he had gotten there. Glenn noticed some people walking by, then returned to his car, presumably to assess the area and collect his thoughts. At 7:27 p.m., he got out of his car again, this time carrying a large white bag. After checking around and confirming that no one was nearby, he approached Michael's front door at 7:30 p.m. Glenn knocked on the door, and his sudden appearance at such a late hour made Michael nervous. He went into the kitchen and grabbed a large knife for protection. Silvana opened the door slightly and kept it on the chain. A brief conversation ensued, in which Michael told Glenn that he could not help Glenn. Glenn then held out his hand as if to say goodbye, and Michael, thinking it was safe, shook his hand. This turned out to be a grave mistake. Glenn grabbed Michael's hand, forcing him into the house. A struggle broke out as Glenn attempted to pull out a handgun and aim it at Michael's head. Michael fought back violently with the knife, striking Glenn several times. Tragically, a shot rang out, killing Michael instantly. Glenn then pointed the gun at Silvana, apparently intending to eliminate her as a witness. However, he had only loaded one bullet into the gun, and when he pulled the trigger, the handgun clicked but did not fire. In a fit of rage, he struck Silvana with his gun, knocking her unconscious. Glenn may have intended to kill her, but after the first blow, he collapsed to the floor, bleeding heavily from a stab wound. By 9:32 p.m., the situation was over. Silvana regained consciousness and found both men dead. She called emergency services, reporting that she had been attacked and that her fiancé had died. She had only suffered a minor concussion from the blow to her head and was weakened by blood loss. When the police arrived, they found a chaotic scene. Silvana gave a detailed account of the events, but as the sole survivor, she became the prime suspect. The police quickly determined that Silvana had nothing to do with the murder. They located Glenn's car parked on the street across from the house. Inside, they found his untouched lunch of fried chicken and green beans. A database check confirmed that the car belonged to Glenn. Police reviewed surveillance camera footage and accessed Glenn's mobile phone. The case was complicated from the start, taking 3 months for police to identify Bianca as the mastermind behind the attack. She apparently believed she would escape, so she was shocked when the police arrived at her home. Bianca Edmonds was arrested in December 2016 and taken to the police station for questioning, where she became hysterical. She acted as if Glenn was making things up and tried to convince him that he had not made a terrible mistake. However, he ignored her warnings and went ahead with his plan while she was away. Bianca claimed that her boyfriend was furious with Michael's behavior and that he was going to take their son away. According to Bianca, Glenn wanted to spend more time with the child. Although Glenn was not the boy's biological father, He had long wanted a child. The police knew this was a lie. Evidence from Glenn's phone confirmed their suspicions. The phone contained saved text messages and recorded calls detailing the planned crime. The police uncovered a wealth of information about the murder plot that had been in the works for months. In her defense, Bianca presented the last text message Glenn had sent her, in which he expressed his love for her and his hatred for Michael. She claimed that this text message made her aware of the impending attack, which she felt powerless to prevent. However, the police quickly noticed a major problem with the notes Glenn had written about the murder plan. They were full of spelling errors. In contrast, the text message Bianca received was perfectly written, too perfectly, and it resembled her own writing style. This led the police to suspect that she had sent the text messages from Glenn's phone to create a false narrative. Bianca denied any involvement in the crime and claimed she knew nothing about it. Despite the strong case against Bianca, the police did not have enough evidence to charge her at the time. She dismissed the charges and denied any involvement in the murder. As a result, she was released, and the investigation continued. During this time, Bianca became bored and returned to Tinder in search of new dates. Just 3 weeks after Glenn's death, she met a man who had just been released from prison on parole. He had a history of violent crime, including the murder of his first wife by slitting her throat in front of their 6-year-old son. Early in their relationship, Bianca informed him that her third husband, Glenn, had died of cancer just weeks after they were to marry. Bianca was pregnant but unfortunately lost the baby in an accident. Her new boyfriend later discovered Glenn and Michael online. He confronted her about the incident, and she revealed that she had planned the murder but insisted that Glenn should not die. She explained that she was too scared to share this with him when they first met, worried that he would not want to continue their relationship. Bianca also admitted to sending text messages from her husband's phone to mislead the investigation. She expressed deep regret for Glenn's death, explaining that she only intended to get rid of Michael. Her motive was fear that he might gain custody of their son. Following Bianca's confession, she became panicked and expressed fear of being caught by the police. Her boyfriend reported her statements to the police. In April 2018, Bianca was questioned again. Despite her boyfriend's testimony, she continued to deny sending the text messages, claiming that she had never seen any maps of Michael's house and denying any involvement in any plans to kill her ex-husband. The police informed her that her fingerprints had been found on the handgun used in the shooting. She was initially unable to respond to this information but continued to deny that custody issues were a motive for the crime. When the police recounted her boyfriend's account, she admitted that she could not remember the conversation. During this time, Bianca suffered from depression after the loss of her child, which she attributed to her mental health and the effects of her antidepressants. Unfortunately, the police determined that they did not have enough evidence to arrest her and were forced to release her. This situation continued until June 2019. Meanwhile, the police had gathered enough evidence to prove that she had either incited or directly participated in the murder of her ex-husband, Michael. The case was delayed, and it was not until June 2022 that hearings began regarding her involvement in Michael's murder. The prosecutor's office believes that Bianca's main motive was her desire to avoid sharing custody of her child and her fear that the father might take the child away. The police discovered that Bianca had planned to imprison her third husband, Glenn, to remove him from her life, as she found him too old and was bored with him. However, the attack did not go as planned, resulting in the deaths of both Michael and Glenn. The prosecution argued that Bianca had written a text message pretending to be Glenn to create an alibi. They also revealed that the outing with Glenn's mother was part of the plan for the crime. To convince the jury, they thoroughly analyzed all the recordings of conversations and text messages. All available evidence was presented, including a map that Bianca was said to have drawn. Bianca's DNA and fingerprints were found on the murder weapon, which clearly indicated that she had lied. Her attorney claimed that this was only circumstantial evidence. It was believed that Glenn disliked Michael because of his relationship with her son. However, several witnesses testified for the prosecution, claiming that Bianca had long wanted to get rid of Michael, her ex-husband, due to a custody dispute. Even Bianca's mother testified in court that the day after the murder, her daughter called to confess that Glenn should not have died and that it was her fault. Bianca claimed that the fingerprints found on the murder weapon were the result of an intimate encounter between her and Glenn. She stated that he was aroused when she pointed the gun at him, but this explanation seemed implausible and did not account for her dishonesty during the interrogations. A few weeks after she began contacting her new boyfriend, Bianca discovered that she was pregnant again. He offered to recant his statement to the police if she forgave him and returned to him, but Bianca believed that the real father of the child was someone else. The jury deliberated on the complicated case but could not reach a unanimous verdict, leading to the cancellation of the original hearings. A retrial began in August, but it was also found to be flawed due to arguments that violated court rules. In December 2022, the case returned to court, this time with all the evidence gathered during the investigation presented. The prosecution presented strong evidence, including text messages exchanged between Bianca and Glenn. In these messages, Bianca mentioned celebrating a special day, although she had no legitimate reason for the occasion. This implied a connection to the murder. Ultimately, the jury concluded that Bianca was the cunning mastermind behind this terrible crime. 2 lives were lost, one of which was cruelly deceived. People were horrified by the level of manipulation Glenn faced before his death. Bianca recognized his weakness and exploited it to her own advantage, trying to achieve multiple goals at once. However, Glenn's death was not part of her plan. She mistakenly believed she could convince her husband to admit his guilt and escape the consequences. Bianca Edmonds was sentenced to 26 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 20 years. Her children were placed in foster care with relatives, leaving them without parental care. The case of Susan Bailey. Susan was born in 1965 in a small town in Minnesota, USA. She was an ordinary, carefree girl who easily made friends and was sociable. Partly due to having many siblings, her parents had 4 children in total. Susan was smart, did well in school, and was responsible and non-confrontational. From a young age, her parents taught her the importance of independence and hard work. After graduating from high school, Susan enrolled in a local college. To avoid burdening her parents financially while paying for her education, she took a job as a saleswoman. It seemed like everything was falling into place for her. However, she never enjoyed the cold and gray weather of Minnesota and dreamed of moving south. After completing her studies, she decided to relocate to another state. This decision led Susan to the sunny beaches of California, fulfilling her childhood dream. There, she quickly found a job in retail and met a man, Mr. Bailey, who would become her husband. He was calm and reserved, pursuing a military career. They married in 1988. Although Susan's family disapproved of her choice due to the challenges of Mr. Bailey's profession, they ultimately accepted her decision. In the following years, they moved several times because of her husband's military service. While he worked, Susan spent most of her time at home and felt unhappy with this lifestyle. However, he promised to leave the military after his contract ended, which he did in 1990. They then returned to California, and Susan decided to become pregnant with their first child, a girl named Jennifer. 4 years later, they welcomed another child. They chose to focus on their careers to support their growing family. During this time, Susan found success in her retail career and became the primary breadwinner, while her husband struggled in his job. They switched roles, with him taking on the role of a stay-at-home dad, and Susan working to provide for the family. This change was made possible when Susan accepted a job with a new clothing company. In 1997, she was promoted to regional manager of Texas, which came with significant responsibilities. Susan realized she couldn't turn down this opportunity. She and the children relocated to Texas, where they decided to settle in a small town called Denton. In 2000, the Bailey family purchased a house with 4 bedrooms, a living room, and a separate playroom in the small town. It seemed like a perfect place for a peaceful family life. As Susan became part of the local community, she met her neighbors. They had children of school age and lived across the street. They spent a lot of time together, discussing local news. However, Susan later discovered something troubling. Whenever Jennifer visited the neighbor, she would leave with items in her hands. After these visits, the neighboring family noticed that money and belongings were missing, leading them to suspect that Jennifer was stealing. Despite this, her neighbor never brought up her concerns with Susan, possibly thinking that Susan was too busy with work and did not want to burden her with additional problems. As a result, the relationship with the neighbors became strained. Susan's son, David, faced several challenges. He struggled with bedwetting, which required her to change the bedding nearly every day, causing her stress. Additionally, David had behavioral issues and frequently got into trouble. However, these problems were minor compared to the bankruptcy of Susan's company, which led to her losing her job and significant income, severely impacting their family. At that time, she had started her own small cosmetic shop, but it did not compensate for the loss of her managerial position in a large firm. Eventually, she found work at another clothing store, but her new salary was much lower than her previous earnings. During this period, Susan realized her independence, while her husband struggled to find a job to support her. Their relationship became strained, and by 2006, they officially divorced. It remains unclear why her husband did not take any initiative to fight for custody of their children or their assets. He simply left everything to Susan without hesitation and agreed to pay child support. Susan was struggling with her own problems as well as those of her son and daughter, and everything seemed to be getting worse. For the first time, she felt overwhelmed by her new responsibilities. At the same time, she had to work 2 jobs to keep the family financially stable and avoid debt. This left her with little time to spend with her children. Susan was hardly ever home, and the children felt neglected. David was falling behind in school, skipping classes, and even resorting to self-harm in an attempt to get his mother's attention. His sister Jennifer take care of him, but she felt uncomfortable in that role and wanted to enjoy her own life instead. She often expressed her frustration about this. During this time, Jennifer met a boy named Paul Henson, who was a year younger than her. He lived with his family in a trailer park. Paul mentioned that he came from a troubled family, which resonated with Jennifer as she could relate to his struggles. However, Paul was quite unusual. He believed he had 2 distinct personalities. He described one of his 2 personalities as a reincarnation of a 10th century executioner, referring to it as his evil alter ego. Many of his classmates noticed Paul talking to himself, conversing with imaginary people and speaking in languages no one understood. He spent most of his free time playing fantasy computer games. Despite his unusual behavior, Paul genuinely liked Jennifer, and they started dating. Jennifer thought his eccentricities were just a product of his vivid imagination and gradually began to share his interests, playing the same games and acting oddly. For instance, they wore dog collars with each other's names. They also engaged in dark mystical practices, which eventually led to a love triangle. Paul revealed to Jennifer that one of his personalities was fond of her, while another personality of his had feelings for a girl named Marilee. Marilee was a 14-year-old from a wealthy family who appeared naive and impressionable. Marilee and Jennifer both fell under his influence, believing they all had mutual feelings for each other, leading to a complicated emotional situation. Susan Bailey strongly disliked Paul from the start and encouraged her daughter to end her relationship with the unusual Paul. However, Jennifer refused to heed her family's warnings. As a result, both their relationship and the home environment worsened quickly. Despite being told not to communicate with Paul, Jennifer was seen with him during the day when all the adults were home. Additionally, Jennifer regularly ignored her mother's requests regarding her schoolwork, chores, and taking care of David. Jennifer got a job at a fast food restaurant, which meant she was hardly ever home. This worried Susan, as David was often left unsupervised. To help, Susan's parents agreed to take David in for the month of July. During this time, they noticed an improvement in his behavior. They taught him household chores and introduced him to activities like fishing. However, they also observed some concerning behavior when David threw a tantrum in the car after his grandparents refused to buy him something on a whim. He rocked the car back and forth in frustration but calmed down as soon as they got home. This incident made his grandmother realize that David was struggling with emotional issues. Determined to help David, his grandparents began taking him to various doctors and clinics. His grandmother wanted him to stay longer so they could address his problems, but Susan was reluctant to let him stay for too long. Eventually, she bought a ticket and insisted that David return home. When he did, he surprised his mother and sister with his good behavior, and even brought Jennifer a small gift. At this point, Susan had been considering buying a car for Jennifer to make her commute to work easier, but Susan realized she didn't have enough money. Jennifer was unhappy about this and insisted she needed a car for convenience. Her mother asked her to be patient. A month later, Susan was shocked to receive a bill for the children's phone services that totaled $1,500. She found out that Jennifer had been spending all her free time talking to Paul, while David was frequently online, which led to high charges. Susan explained to her children that this was unacceptable and urged them to reduce their phone usage. Shortly after, Susan received a notification that Jennifer had spent an additional $200 on phone calls. Furious and already facing financial difficulties, Susan confronted Jennifer, who claimed that her paycheck had been delayed and that she intended to cover the costs herself. At that point, Susan decided to contact the restaurant where Jennifer worked to inquire about the delay in her daughter's pay. For the past month and a half, Jennifer had not shown up for work, so there was no paycheck for her. This shocked Susan, who realized that Jennifer had been dishonest. Instead of working, she had been spending time with her boyfriend. The next day, Susan at work, leaving David home alone, wandering around the courtyard of the house without clothes, which scared the neighbors. At that moment, Susan understood that she had lost control over her children and felt powerless to change things. To support the family, she had to work all the time. By the end of September, the situation had worsened. Jennifer decided to take advantage of her mother's constant work schedule. She started inviting Paul and Marilee over to the guest room, where her father used to live, spending time with them while Susan was away. When Susan was home, they acted like good guests, but as soon as she left, they behaved rudely. David was aware of everything but kept it a secret from Susan, supporting his sister and her friends. Eventually, they all grew tired of their parents' restrictions on their lives. This frustration led to a dangerous plan to kill Jennifer's mothers and Marilee's mothers, as well as Paul's parents. The trio became involved in various criminal ideas, including poisoning Susan with crushed prescription pills or arranging for her to be electrocuted in the bath. They also considered using a baseball bat, knives to cause serious injury. Paul even thought about shooting his father and stepmother, while Marilee planned to stab her mother while she slept. In the final phase of their plan, the teenagers intended to steal Susan's car, take their parents' money, and escape to Canada. On September 22, 2008, 14-year-old Marilee White had been missing for several days and had not answered her phone. Concerned, her mother reported her daughter as missing. Marilee's friends were also unable to contact her. Marilee's mother took action by distributing flyers with Marilee's photo and contacting the police. Fortunately, a patrol found Marilee wandering aimlessly on the outskirts of town and brought her home. During this time, Marilee revealed that Paul, a friend, had abandoned her. The police persuaded her not to run away again, and it appeared that she had calmed down. However, on the morning of September 23, 2008, Marilee's mother woke up feeling a strange presence. When she opened her eyes, she saw Marilee standing over her bed with a large kitchen knife. Instead of attacking, she reacted defensively as Marilee demanded the car keys to drive to the Bailey family's house. Marilee planned to gather others and escape to Canada. Although she reluctantly gave her the keys, she prevented Marilee from leaving. As soon as Marilee stepped outside, she called the police. Authorities intercepted Marilee and took her to a juvenile detention center. There, Marilee told her cellmate about a plan to kill their parents, but nobody took her seriously. At this time, Paul Henson waited for his father and stepmother to leave their trailer in the morning to go shopping. He broke into his father's room and took his .22 caliber handgun. He intended to shoot them when they returned, but they unexpectedly stopped at a movie theater and then went to visit friends, which delayed him return. Frustrated by the wait, Paul decided to leave and went back to Susan's house. That evening, Marilee was released from custody, and at the same time, Paul's parents reported him missing. The next day, September 24, David took a large knife with him to school. When the school administration learned about it, they issued a written warning to his mother. Susan put the warning on the refrigerator, but was too busy to address it right away. The following day, a police officer approached her to inform her about the search for Paul Henson, suggesting he might be at their house. Although she couldn't find him there, she noticed clear signs that he had been visiting frequently. The detective asked for permission to enter the house and talk to Jennifer, and she agreed. From the beginning, Jennifer seemed nervous. The detective knew about the teenager's deceptive plan and decided to ask Jennifer where Paul was. She said she hadn't seen her boyfriend since Saturday. The detective then requested to speak with her alone, but her mother, Susan, refused. Suspecting that Paul might be hiding in the house, the detective asked to search the premises, but Susan denied the request, stating that a warrant was needed. As a result, the detective left without any new information. The search for Paul continued, and another police officer arrived at the Bailey home. This time, Susan was informed that there were reports suggesting Paul might have a missing .22 caliber pistol from his father's trailer. Worried about safety, she reluctantly allowed the search, although she was not happy about it. During the search, they found several suspicious items, including a large butcher knife, hidden under a couch cushion in the living room. Since the knife did not belong to the Baileys, Susan accused Jennifer of planning to run away with Paul again. Jennifer explained that her friend might have accidentally left his knife at her house during his last visit, but this explanation did not convince Susan. Without waiting for the police to leave, Susan started arguing with her daughter again. Susan threatened to send her to live with her father or grandparents. During a search of Jennifer's room, they found evidence that she was packing her belongings. They also discovered several knives, which raised suspicions. However, since they couldn't find Paul's gun, the police left the house. Later, the mother found a box of ammunition hidden in one of the suitcases and became worried. She called the police again, requesting a more thorough search of her home. When they returned, the police took the ammunition but still did not find a gun. Instead, they found even more knives scattered around the house. In the trash, they found an empty bottle of antidepressants that belonged to Marilee. The Bailey family did not use such medications, but the police were unaware of this girl at the time and overlooked these concerning signs. Paul's father arrived at the house anxious about his son. He packed up Paul's belongings and left with everyone else. The following day, Susan struggled to find a way to resolve issues with her children, but nothing seemed to work. On September 25, she went to her regular job, followed by her second job, finally finishing around midnight. Throughout the day, Susan tried to contact her children, but both ignored her calls and messages. When she got home, she immediately sensed that something was off. The lights were off. Inside, she discovered the usual chaos left by her children. As she moved upstairs in the darkness, the house felt eerily quiet. As Susan climbed the stairs, someone suddenly grabbed her by the neck and covered her mouth with a cloth that had a chemical smell. Just then, Jennifer, Paul, and David stepped out of the shadows. They quickly slit Susan's throat and began stabbing her repeatedly with knives until she lay motionless on the floor within minutes. However, this horrific act was only part of their sinister plan. On September 26, Susan's mother received multiple calls from worried colleagues about Susan, as she had not shown up for her shifts that morning, a surprising behavior for someone who was known to be a workaholic. Susan's mother made several attempts to contact Susan, but was unsuccessful. Eventually, she reached out to the police department in Roanoke, Texas, asking them to check on the Bailey family's home. Over the next 2 days, patrol officers visited the house multiple times, but found no evidence that anyone was there. The lights were off, no cars were in the driveway, and all the doors and windows were closed. There were no signs of distress. It appeared as if the family had gone on vacation. Despite this, Susan's mother was deeply concerned that something might have gone wrong and urged the police to continue investigating. At 3:30 a.m. on September 28, 2008, a police officer in South Dakota spotted a suspicious vehicle parked near a closed gas station. He stopped to observe and noticed a teenager got out without turning on the headlights, did something briefly, then returned to the vehicle, and they all drove away. The officer decided to follow them. He saw that the car had Texas license plates, indicating they had traveled a long distance. However, it was unusual for teenagers to be out so late alone, making the situation seem very odd. The police officer pulled over the car and noticed a teenager driving. In the passenger seat was another minor, a girl, and in the back seat was a younger boy with a large dog. The car was stopped, and they were asked for identification, but none of them had any. The driver was 16-year-old Paul Henson. When the police officer checked his information, he discovered that Paul had been reported as a runaway and was also a suspect in a firearms case. The car belonged to Susan Bailey. Backup was requested, and they searched the stolen vehicle, but no gun was found. Jennifer's statements were inconsistent from the beginning. She appeared frightened and exhausted. Meanwhile, Texas police were alerted that the missing persons had been located. When Texas detectives heard this, they realized that Susan would never have allowed her children to travel that far without her. They suspected that something had happened to her and decided it was time to thoroughly investigate the Bailey home, especially after numerous requests from Susan's parents and colleagues. Upon entering the house, the detectives were immediately hit by a strong smell of decomposition. On the first floor, they found only a plate of pudding that had fallen on the floor. Forensic analysis later revealed that the pudding was laced with drugs. On the second floor, at the top of the stairs, they discovered Susan lying face down, blood everywhere. She had suffered 26 stab wounds and had been brutally beaten with a blunt object. The bathtub was filled with water, and an electric cord with exposed wires was hanging from the curtain plugged in. It appeared that someone had meticulously planned multiple methods to murder her. The smell of decomposition mixed with the smell of toiletries. A receipt found in the house confirmed that 13-year-old David had purchased these cleaning supplies at a local Walmart at the indicated time. In Jennifer's room, investigators found a diary in which she detailed plans for committing murder and starting a new life with Paul in Canada. They also uncovered additional evidence, including freshly cut hair belonging to Paul, clothing stained with Susan's blood, and DNA traces from Jennifer and David. It was clear that the teenagers had not effectively cleaned up the murder scene. The 3 suspects were detained in Texas, while a dog associated with them was taken to a shelter. The juvenile offenders quickly began to speak. Paul Henson accused David of the murder, claiming they all fled their town to protect the boy from the authorities. When detectives questioned David, he admitted to killing his mother and laughed. The detectives were taken aback. They did not expect such a response from a 13-year-old. Jennifer placed all the blame on Paul, insisting that she and her brother had done nothing wrong. The only person who avoided severe punishment was Marilee White, who was not in the car and had no evidence linking her to Susan's murder. However, she remained under police scrutiny for a long time and was questioned multiple times. Eventually, Marilee confirmed her friend's boyfriend's claims that they had planned to kill their families. She shared many details about their relationships. According to Marilee, Paul, Jennifer, and she had become very close. Paul enjoyed being intimate with both girls simultaneously, arguing that since he was dating Jennifer and had a separate relationship with Marilee, it wasn't cheating. The group engaged in occult practices, including cutting themselves and drinking each other's blood. Jennifer's plan was to kill all their parents, escape to Canada, and start their own commune. Because of her cooperation with the police, no charges were filed against Marilee. She was compelled to testify at the trial against the other conspirators. Based on her testimony, the prosecution believed that Jennifer ambushed her mother in a hallway on the second floor and attacked her with a bat, while Paul Henson came from behind and cut her throat. David also took part in the crime and inflicted superficial stab wounds on her body. Jennifer and Paul, despite being minors, were tried as adults for murder and each received a 60-year prison sentence. They will be eligible for parole starting in 2038. David was also tried as an adult for his involvement in the crime and was convicted of complicity, receiving a 26-year sentence. He will be eligible for release in 2034 when he turns 40. Following these events, Marilee White moved to a different state with her mother and changed her name. Her photo is kept confidential to protect her safety, as she was a young witness. The case of Jennifer Clark. Donald Clark, 40, and Jennifer Clark, 30, are a married couple living in the small town of Zebulon, Georgia, USA. For a time, their life together seemed happy. They have 2 sons together, and Donald also has an adult daughter from a previous relationship. Donald and Jennifer met in 1996 when Jennifer was 18. Despite a 10-year age gap, they quickly connected and got married in 1997. The following year, they welcomed their first son, and 2 years later, their second son was born. The family settled in Zebulon, a quiet rural town. Donald has always been a hardworking man. He dropped out of high school and started working immediately at a local factory. Over time, he pursued further education and advanced his career within the same company. Jennifer, on the other hand, worked as a nurse at a nursing home. Like any marriage, their relationship seemed harmonious at first. However, after the birth of their children, things began to change. Donald's daughter noticed that Jennifer was increasingly critical of him. When Donald's daughter became old enough, she decided to move out of the house. She chose to live with her grandparents due to Jennifer's erratic behavior. Unable to wait until adulthood to leave, she moved out early to escape the conflicts caused by her stepmother. For a while, Donald's daughter lived in Florida, but at 19, she became pregnant. She decided to move back in with her father for support. During this time, Jennifer and Donald appeared to be rebuilding their relationship. However, by the time the baby was born, Donald's daughter noticed that her father's relationship with Jennifer had deteriorated again. As before, the house was filled with arguments, and Jennifer continued to pressure and humiliate Donald. Once again, Donald's daughter was forced to move out. Many people advised Donald to end the marriage, but he hesitated because he appreciated Jennifer's housekeeping skills and her role in their daily lives. In early 2008, the couple moved into a new home in the same town. Around the same time, Michael the 22-year-old son of Donald's best friend Charlie, moved in with them. Michael had serious legal problems, had dropped out of school, and had begun using illegal drugs, which led to more charges and increased police surveillance. Hoping to help Michael turn his life around, Donald invited him to live with them. Jennifer quickly became close to Michael, which soon aroused Donald's suspicions. Eventually, Donald directly asked Michael if he was having an affair with Jennifer. Michael admitted to the affair. This revelation did not seem to surprise Donald, as Jennifer had been unfaithful to him on several previous occasions. Despite her repeated infidelity, Donald always forgave Jennifer, hoping to keep their marriage intact for the sake of their children. After learning about the affair, Donald asked Michael to move out of their home. Donald began to wonder what more he could do to make his wife happy. He provided for her and their children, was a loving husband, and a devoted father. However, it became clear to everyone that the problem was not Donald, but Jennifer. Donald decided to have an honest conversation with Jennifer about their problems. They finally came to the conclusion that it was time to separate. Over the next few days, they thought it over and ultimately agreed that divorce was the best decision. Everything seemed normal, with no signs of trouble. However, on the night of March 7, Donald woke up to find a sheet covering his face. He quickly threw the sheet off and was nearly hit in the head with a baseball bat that his wife Jennifer was holding. Donald immediately called the police to report his wife's unprovoked aggressive behavior. However, when the police arrived, he calmed down and decided he didn't want Jennifer to face legal consequences, so he withdrew the complaint. The incident, nonetheless, left an impression on the police. The next day, Donald went to court and filed for divorce. Jennifer left the house and moved in with Michael. At the time, Michael was living with his grandmother. Jennifer moved in with him, leaving the children in Donald's care. The breakup seemed to work out for everyone. During this time, Donald's friends noticed that he began to do much better. Eventually, life started to improve for him. Meanwhile, Jennifer told her family about her new relationship with Michael, and they were harshly critical. Her mother called it the stupidest decision she had ever made, claiming that Jennifer had left a wonderful husband and family for someone who wasn't worth it. By the spring of 2008, Donald and Jennifer had separated, but were still not divorced. During this time, Donald focused on his work and devoted all of his free time to caring for their two sons. Raising the boys alone was a challenge for him, so he decided to hire a live-in nanny. The nanny, Danielle Young, was a single mother in her 20s with two children from previous failed relationships. Donald met Danielle at a bar shortly after his separation. She immediately caught his attention, and they spent the evening talking. A few weeks later, Donald offered her a position as a babysitter for his children. Their relationship soon developed into a romantic one. During this time, unexpected problems arose. Jennifer discovered she was pregnant, but couldn't be sure whether the father was Donald or Michael. A DNA test was required to determine paternity. Jennifer decided to share the news with Donald. She went to his home, unaware that he had hired Danielle as a babysitter. Despite their separation, Jennifer became enraged when she saw another woman in the house. She stormed in, causing a scene, screaming and arguing. She then grabbed a baseball bat, threatened to harm Donald, and left the house. Danielle was shocked by the events that unfolded. She feared not only for her own safety, but also for the safety of her children. She became convinced that Jennifer was a threat to her sons. During the summer, Danielle decided to move away from Donald, partly because of their 17-year age gap. Meanwhile, Jennifer and Donald's divorce was finalized in July 2008. At the same time, a paternity test revealed that the child Jennifer was carrying was actually Michael's. Living conditions at Michael's grandmother's house were poor. Unfortunately, neither Jennifer nor Michael could afford to move out. A few months later, the couple moved into Donald's sister's house. She is very close to Donald and was surprised when he asked her to let Jennifer and Michael stay with. However, she agreed to help. Donald was likely trying to reconcile with Jennifer. He kept insisting that the boys needed a mother and repeatedly tried to convince her to reunite and rebuild the family. However, Jennifer continued to refuse until October 2008. She eventually agreed to Donald's proposal and decided to return. She had come to realize that Michael was a failure. As both a husband and a father, he did not work, had no money, and their family lived in poverty. This ultimately led her to return to Donald. After her return, Jennifer resumed managing the household, taking care of the children, and handling daily responsibilities. Donald continued to work hard and spent his free time with his sons. Notably, he even accepted Jennifer's unborn child with Michael as his own and planned to raise the child as part of the family. Despite their reconciliation, it was evident to everyone that the couple's relationship was extremely toxic and even worse than it had been before the divorce. Nevertheless, Donald stubbornly clung to the illusion of a happy family life. Meanwhile, Michael came home from work to find Jennifer gone. She had left, taking all her belongings without saying a word. Later, Michael discovered that she had returned to her ex-husband, Donald. This devastated him, as he had been confident in the life they were building together and had even planned their future. In desperation, Michael begged her to come back. The situation became tense and unpredictable, with the potential to spiral out of control at any moment. On November 19, 2008, just before Thanksgiving, Donald's sister began to worry about him, as she had not heard from him for several days. While this might not have been a concern for most people, it was unusual for Donald, who was always in constant contact with his family. His complete silence raised red flags. Unable to reach him directly, she contacted Jennifer, who claimed she had no idea where Donald was. Following their conversation, Donald's sister went to the police to report him missing. Officers visited Donald's home and spoke with Jennifer. She explained that she had last seen him the previous night and had not noticed anything unusual. According to Jennifer, Donald had come home after work, had dinner, watched TV, and gone to bed. The next morning, he left for work as usual. Jennifer claimed they had exchanged text messages during his shift while she was taking the kids to school. Donald had read and responded to her messages. She then spent the rest of the day doing chores, but Donald did not return home at his usual time. She said she had no idea where he could be, and noted that his phone, wallet, papers, and car were all missing. Jennifer speculated that he might have run away. Donald's sister, however, strongly disagreed. She believed that such behavior was completely out of character for Donald. She knew he had done everything he could to make the relationship work, that he always put his family first, and that he would never consider running away. While gathering more information, Donald's sister discovered that he had been seeing a woman named Danielle. This revelation shifted the police's focus. They began to consider the possibility that Donald had left to escape his toxic relationship with Jennifer and was now with Danielle. Based on these details, the police concluded that Donald might have left to pursue happiness and would eventually return. Donald's sister refused to give up. She printed flyers and distributed them widely. Although the search yielded no results, it prompted the police to take further action. They noted that Donald had not committed any crimes or made any bank transactions since his disappearance. Additionally, his cell phone had not been used. These details led the police to suspect that he had not simply run away. Police began piecing together a timeline of events from the day he went missing. However, witness testimonies were inconsistent, making it impossible to determine the exact time of his disappearance. Donald's boss shared an intriguing story about him. According to the boss, Donald was determined to repair his relationship with Danielle. However, he discovered that Danielle was pregnant with another man's child. Although her relationship with the baby's father had ended, Danielle chose to keep the baby and was navigating the challenges of motherhood. Donald, who often confided in his boss, revealed just days before his disappearance that he wanted to end his toxic relationship with Jennifer and was considering starting a family with Danielle. Donald's sudden disappearance left his workplace baffled. He stopped showing up to work, didn't contact anyone, and ignored all attempts to reach him. This behavior was completely out of character for Donald, who was known for being responsible and punctual. He had recently been promoted and was putting more effort into his job, making it hard to believe he would abandon everything without explanation. Hoping to find Donald safe, the police went to Danielle's house. However, Danielle told them she hadn't seen or been able to contact him. She became very distressed when the police informed her of his disappearance. Danielle confirmed that both she and Donald had wanted to reconcile and that she had been waiting for him. She fully cooperated with the investigation, providing an alibi that was verified, ruling her out as a suspect. The police explored various scenarios to uncover a motive for Donald's disappearance, but found no explanation or trace of him. As time passed, the likelihood of finding him alive grew slim. On November 25, 2008, Jennifer gave birth to a son. Around the same time, the police obtained a search warrant for Donald's home. What they found in the master bedroom was disturbing. The room smelled strongly of cleaning products, and the bed appeared unusually clean, as though it had been scrubbed with a strong solution. The mattress and sheets were brand new, and the wall behind the headboard had also been scrubbed. However, only certain areas of the room had been cleaned. The wallpaper on one wall was noticeably faded and white, in stark contrast to the rest of the room, which was dusty and cluttered. Jennifer claimed she had cleaned the room to prepare for her son's birth, but her explanation didn't add up. Only one wall had been cleaned, while the rest of the house remained messy. Forensic experts examined the scene and found microscopic drops of blood. When questioned, Jennifer admitted there might be blood in the room, explaining that her 3 young children often fought and could have injured themselves, causing nosebleeds. She claimed her cleaning efforts were simply part of maintaining the room. However, her explanation raised doubts. Why had she focused on cleaning just one wall while leaving the rest of the house untouched? It seemed clear she had attempted to hide evidence and was now trying to mislead the investigation. Despite their suspicions, the police couldn't get Jennifer to confess. The police decided to question her children, who provided important details about the night Donald went missing. The teens mentioned that their mother had slept in the bedroom with their father that night. Later, they were awakened by the sound of someone running on the first floor. When they got up to investigate, they discovered that the back door of the house was wide open, which was unusual for their family. The children admitted they did not fully understand what had happened. Their mother, Jennifer, avoided discussing the incident. However, their testimony supported Jennifer's alibi, suggesting that she was unlikely to be involved in Donald's disappearance. The police then shifted their focus to other suspects, particularly Michael. He had a clear motive, as his girlfriend Jennifer had recently reconciled with Donald, her ex-husband. Several neighbors reported seeing Michael's pickup truck near Donald's house that evening. Michael was arrested and questioned, but the police obtained no useful information from him. He was later released, though he remained the prime suspect in the case. A significant breakthrough in the investigation occurred on December 23, when a random witness contacted the police station to report an unusual discovery. While walking his dog, the witness noticed the animal chewing on something. Upon closer inspection, he realized it was a wallet containing Donald's ID. Authorities quickly responded and noted that the discovery site was near Michael's mother's house. This prompted the police to conduct a thorough search of the surrounding area. During their search, they found a baseball bat and several other items along the road. Based on these findings, the investigation was expanded to include the area near Michael's mother's home. A nearby field drew the attention of the police. After approximately an hour of searching through bushes, police found a camouflage tarp concealed beneath layers of leaves and branches. Something was wrapped inside. When they opened it, they discovered a body, its head encased in a plastic bag, wrapped in the tarp. Tattoos on the body allowed police to identify it as Donald Clark. The cause of death was determined to be multiple blunt force traumas to the head. One detail stood out to investigators: Donald was wearing pajamas. This finding contradicted Jennifer's earlier claim that Donald had gone to work. It appeared that he had been killed while sleeping in bed. Michael and Jennifer were preparing to celebrate Christmas together when police arrested them. Jennifer showed no signs of grief over her ex-husband's death and seemed content with her life with Michael. However, during a subsequent interrogation, Jennifer completely changed her story. She admitted that she had initially been sleeping in the same bed with Donald on the morning he went missing. At some point, Jennifer claimed, she awoke to find Michael standing over Donald, holding something in his hand. Terrified, Jennifer panicked and ran to her son's room, locking the door from the inside. The commotion woke the children, and from inside the locked room, Jennifer said she could hear Michael beating Donald to death with a baseball bat. After the attack, Jennifer claimed that Michael knocked on the bedroom door and demanded her help cleaning the scene. She stated that she complied out of fear for her own safety, believing she might be his next victim. Jennifer accused Michael of being a manipulative and abusive person who had kept her under oppressive control. She admitted that they cleaned the bedroom walls with bleach and replaced the blood-stained sheets and mattress with new ones. Jennifer said she later helped Michael carry Donald's body to the car, where Michael wrapped Donald's head in a plastic bag to minimize the amount of blood left at the crime scene. Michael, however, provided a completely different account. He denied Jennifer's allegations and claimed that she had never truly ended their relationship. According to Michael, Jennifer wanted to reconcile with Donald only to obtain financial benefits from him. He maintained that he and Jennifer were still seeing each other regularly and stated that on the night of the murder, Jennifer called him around 1 a.m., asking to meet for intimacy. Michael alleged that Jennifer used a flashlight to signal him when he arrived at the house, indicating it was safe to enter. She supposedly assured Michael that Donald would not be home. However, when Michael entered the house, he claimed he found Donald asleep in the bedroom. Jennifer took an aluminum baseball bat from the closet and repeatedly struck Donald in the head. She then begged Michael to help dispose of the body and clean up the blood. Feeling he had no choice, Michael agreed. He later claimed that Jennifer was a dangerous manipulator who had controlled him throughout their relationship. Michael admitted to helping move the body out of town and scattering Donald's belongings in various locations. However, he kept Donald's cell phone. They used it to send text messages to Jennifer, pretending Donald was still alive. After conflicting interviews, both were arrested and charged with the premeditated murder of Donald Clark. Police believed they had planned the crime together. Michael was also charged with planting evidence to mislead the investigation. Jennifer's lawyers immediately contested the charges, arguing that she was 9 months pregnant at the time and unlikely to have beaten a grown man to death without assistance. Facing the possibility of the death penalty, Michael opted for a plea bargain with the prosecution. He admitted to complicity in planning the murder, destroying evidence, and obstructing the investigation. In exchange for his testimony against Jennifer, he received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 30 years. The trial, delayed several times, finally began on January 31, 2011. The prosecution's star witness was Michael. He testified that on the night of the murder, Jennifer had called him, saying she wanted to leave Donald. Michael initially refused to help. Later, Jennifer called again, saying she had packed her bags and needed to be picked up. When Michael arrived, Jennifer attacked Donald and killed him with a baseball bat. Michael also revealed that Jennifer had threatened to cut ties with him if he didn't help cover up the crime and dispose of the body, which prompted his involvement. Several witnesses described Jennifer as argumentative and confrontational. After less than an hour of deliberation, the jury found Jennifer Clark guilty on all counts, including murder and tampering with evidence. She was sentenced to life in prison plus 60 years. Both defendants are currently serving sentences in state prisons. All of Jennifer's appeals have been denied. The case of Joanna Yates. Joanna Yates was born on April 19, 1985, in the United Kingdom. Her friends and family called her Jo. She was the younger of two children, with an older brother. Joanna enjoyed a happy childhood in a loving home, as her parents were relatively wealthy and sent her to a private school. After graduating, she attended the Peter Simons College, where she studied landscape design and earned a diploma. This education helped her become a skilled professional in a field she had always dreamed of working in. By the end of 2010, at 25 years old, Joanna was thriving in her career. During this period, she was in a relationship with Greg Reardon, who was 27. Greg and Joanna had met in December 2008. Both Joanna and Greg were dedicated young professionals who prioritized achieving financial stability before considering marriage and children. In October 2010, Joanna received a job offer that marked a turning point in her life. With her solid professional qualifications, she was hired as a landscape designer at a promising company in Bristol. Everything seemed to align perfectly, allowing her to begin building her future. They started renting a ground floor apartment in a private house in the city that same month. They quickly focused on their work. Joanna was known for her positivity, cheerfulness, and energy. With Christmas approaching, they excitedly prepared to celebrate in their new home. They decorated their apartment and bought gifts for their families, looking forward to the holiday. However, no one could have anticipated that this year's celebration would be marred by unexpected events. On the evening of December 17, 2010, Joanna was enjoying a drink with friends. Around 8 p.m., she left the pub to go home. She walked through the city center and stopped at a supermarket but didn't find anything she liked. So she went to another store, where she bought 2 bottles of cider. After that, she entered Tesco Express and purchased a pizza. With her essentials in hand, Joanna headed to her apartment, arriving at 8:50 p.m. Once home, she turned on the oven to reheat the pizza while texting several colleagues about her evening plans. According to her colleagues, Joanna planned to spend the rest of the day alone since Greg was away for the entire weekend visiting relatives in another city. She shared with them her feelings of sadness about being alone, mentioned that she would keep herself busy with Christmas preparations, and planned to bake pies to share with her colleagues after the weekend. Greg returned home on Sunday afternoon, December 19, expecting to see Joanna, but she was not there. He found her handbag, keys, and other belongings that she usually kept at home. He also discovered her winter coat. When he called her, he only found her phone lying in the living room, which worried him the most because Joanna had left without her mobile phone. According to all information, Joanna should have been at home and not at work. Even if she had gone shopping or visiting someone, it was strange that she left without her coat, phone, and keys. Something didn't add up. He noticed that the cat hadn't been fed for a long time. It was clearly very hungry and practically lunged at the food. Greg suddenly realized that something must have happened to his girlfriend during the 2 days he had spent in another city. While he was away, Greg had repeatedly called and texted Joanna, but she ignored him. At first, he thought it might be due to network problem, but now he knows things are not that simple. He remembered that 2 days ago, Joanna was supposed to go to the pub with her colleagues. And since then, he hadn't heard from her. He reached out to her parents, friends, and colleagues, but no one knew where she was. That night, feeling frustrated and worried, Greg decided to go to the police station to report his girlfriend missing. Given the time that had passed, the police took the situation very seriously and quickly considered the possibility of abduction. They searched Joanna and Greg's apartment, but found no signs of violence or forced entry. It seemed that Joanna knew her abductor and had let him in willingly. It was likely that she had been attacked in the apartment. During the investigation, they found a receipt showing that Joanna had purchased pizza and 2 bottles of cider on the evening of December 17. One of the cider bottles was open, suggesting she had taken a few sips before something occurred. However, Neither the pizza box nor the food itself was found. If Joanna had been attacked immediately with the intent to abduct her, or something worse, it was improbable that she would have had time to eat an entire pizza and throw away the box. Joanna had clearly gone missing, and it was concerning that she hadn't opened her advent calendar on December 17 and 18, even though she had been doing so every evening prior. On December 21, her boyfriend and family appeared on television, pleading for anyone with information about Joanna to come forward. Following this, news of her disappearance spread rapidly across the country. During this time, authorities focused on Joanna's close circle, particularly her boyfriend Greg, who had been away and could have used that as an alibi. However, he quickly proved he was with relatives in another city, clearing him as a suspect. Additionally, all signs indicated that their relationship was healthy, with no apparent motive for anyone to harm her. The police interviewed the tenants living on the first floor, which had 2 rented apartments, while the landlord lived on the second floor. They also questioned the landlord, who insisted he had not heard anything that evening and had not seen Joanna. The tenants on the first floor were a couple, Vincent Tabak, an engineer, and his girlfriend Tanya, an analyst. They were a respectable couple planning to marry soon. They mentioned that they did not know their neighbors well since they had only recently moved in and had not met them yet. On the night in question, Tanya was attending a corporate party, and Vincent picked her up at 2 a.m. He did not notice anything unusual that night. They had hosted a loud party on December 1 with music and heavy conversation. During the evening, they heard some loud female screams, but all the young partygoers were drunk and did not pay much attention. As the sounds quickly faded, it was unclear where they originated. However, they now thought those screams might be connected to their missing neighbor. At first, everyone was hopeful that Joanna would come home safely. However, as the days went by, their confidence began to fade. On December 25, 2010, a young couple was walking their dogs about 5 kilometers from Joanna's apartment in a remote area on the city's outskirts. They noticed something unusual sticking out from the snow by the roadside and thought it looked like clothing. Curious, they decided to investigate further and uncovered the body of a girl. They immediately contacted the police, and it was quickly confirmed that the deceased was 25-year-old Joanna, who had been missing since that weekend. Heavy snowfall had covered her body, which is why it had remained undiscovered for a week. Forensic experts who examined the scene quickly observed that the body was not only covered in snow, but also intentionally concealed under leaves and branches. This suggested that Joanna was not just a random victim of an accident. It appeared she had been deliberately hidden there. She was found wearing the same clothes she had on Friday evening, except for her coat, which was left in her apartment. Her t-shirt was raised, exposing her right breast, which could be related to the motive behind the attack. Although she was wearing warm socks, one sock was missing and could not be located. The police speculated that the absence of the sock might indicate that the killer took it as a trophy, a behavior sometimes seen in maniacs and serial offenders. A forensic examination revealed that the cause of death was asphyxiation. In addition to neck injuries, 43 other wounds were found on her body, including abrasions, deep scratches, and bruises from blunt force trauma. This evidence indicated that the victim had fought desperately for her life. Because she was discovered in the snow during cold weather, her body had not decomposed and remained in good condition. Notably, Joanna was found lying in a fetal position, suggesting that she had been intentionally placed there. The examination also showed that she had not eaten the pizza, indicating that she was attacked before she had the chance to do so. Interestingly, just a meter away from her body, blood was found on a concrete barrier, which was identified as belonging to Joanna. It appears that the killer initially intended to move her body over the barrier, but was unable to do so for some reason. This suggests that Joanna was killed in one location and that an attempt was made to hide her elsewhere. It also seemed that the perpetrator or perpetrators were startled and had to flee quickly. During the examination of Joanna's clothing, traces of semen from a man, likely the attacker, were discovered on her jeans, particularly near the zipper, indicating an abuse assault. As it became evident that the crime was particularly brutal, a large-scale operation was launched to locate the suspect. This investigation was said to be one of the largest ever undertaken by the police in this part of the UK, involving around 60 officers. They reached out to the public for assistance, initially offering a reward of £10,000 for information leading to the capture of the suspect, which was later raised to £60,000. Joanna's friends created a website and used social media to support the investigation. Meanwhile, detectives focused on examining Joanna's immediate social circle, looking for any potential enemies. Described as non-confrontational and mild-mannered, she had no known conflicts with anyone. The investigators gathered video footage from surveillance cameras located on the Clifton Suspension Bridge, which Joanna crossed on her way home from the pub, where she was last seen alive. Upon reviewing the footage, they found it to be of poor quality, yielding no suspicious activity. The detectives also considered the possibility that the suspect might have taken a different route over another bridge across the River Avon, situated a kilometer from Joanna's home, which could have avoided detection by the cameras. However, this theory remained unconfirmed. A man named Christopher Jeffries was the landlord of the apartment rented by Joanna. He had previously been a teacher but retired and now made his living from rental properties. People described him as quiet, very intelligent, and somewhat eccentric. Before these events, no one suspected he could be involved in anything serious. His unusual behavior was never perceived as a threat. The police spoke to Christopher again about the night of December 17. He stated that he went to the gym to work out that evening and returned to his apartment around 9 p.m., not leaving again afterward. This timing matched when Joanna was believed to have come home. Christopher insisted that he did not see or hear anything suspicious that night and did not hear any of the female screams reported by party attendees. His alibi was weak because he lived alone, with no one to support his claim. However, concerns grew due to the inconsistencies in his story when he spoke with detectives again. He suddenly mentioned seeing a few unfamiliar young men near Joanna's home just before her return, describing them as suspicious. He could not see them clearly, and this addition to his story was met with great skepticism. Joanna's landlord became the primary suspect. Distrust intensified when Greg informed the police that Mr. Christopher had helped him jump-start his car on the morning of December 17, just before he left town. Greg clearly recalled saying he was leaving for the weekend and was worried about his girlfriend being alone. Naturally, a perpetrator might have seen this as a convenient opportunity to attack. The police had not yet confirmed their suspicions, but somehow journalists discovered that Christopher Jeffries was the main suspect. Reporters began to chase him in the streets, forcing Christopher to stay home almost all the time to avoid them. The situation deteriorated further when various rumors about him started appearing in the newspapers. He expressed that he was close to a nervous breakdown and felt unsafe. Whenever he went outside, he was openly called a criminal, with fabricated stories about child abuse during his teaching career. On December 30, 2010, the police arrested Christopher and subjected him to harsh interrogation. Despite this, he firmly maintained that he had no involvement in the murder. At that point, authorities did not have enough evidence to charge him in court. However, later, Vincent, another tenant living in Mr. Christopher's house, came to the police station. He suddenly remembered that on the night of the incident, he had left the house twice and saw the landlord's car parked in the driveway both times, first in the early evening and again later when he went out to find his girlfriend. Vincent noted that the car was facing the opposite direction the second time, suggesting it had been driven somewhere that night, which contradicted Christopher's claim that he hadn't gone anywhere. During the search of Christopher's apartment, police discovered a pair of sneakers with small stains that looked like blood. These items were sent to the lab for testing, but the analysis would take time. Under UK law, police can only hold a suspect for 24 hours if there is not enough evidence to make an arrest. After one day, they must either release the suspect or go to court to request more time for custody. In this case, the police chose to extend Christopher's detention because they needed more time to analyze the evidence and formally document witness Vincent's statement. Despite the extension, the police could not establish Christopher's involvement in the crime. The stains on the sneakers were too small to obtain a DNA profile with the technology available at that time. After testing, the lab returned the sneakers, stating that it was impossible to extract DNA or determine the source of the stains. Even so, this did not lead to Christopher's release. The male DNA found on Joanna's body and clothing did not match his profile. On January 1, 2011, during a holiday, Christopher was released without charges, which was a relief for him. However, the media continued to pursue him. The investigation had a promising lead in Vincent Tabak, who altered information in his testimony. He had no alibi at the time of the crime, making him a new suspect. The police believed he might have tried to frame the landlord in an attempt to mislead the investigation. Suspicion towards Vincent grew stronger after he called the police station to explain how Christopher's car had moved while he was in the Netherlands. It was puzzling why Vincent hadn't mentioned this detail earlier. To obtain an official statement from him, several police officers visited him on December 31, 2010. During the questioning, they noticed that Vincent acted strangely. He was vague in some parts of his story, but gave very detailed answers in others, almost as if he had rehearsed them. These inconsistencies raised red flags for the experienced officers, who noticed that he was carefully considering his answers and managing the information he shared. The most suspicious detail was the unexplained scratches on his hands. He insisted he didn't know Joanna at all, claiming he had only moved into the apartment a week before the incident. When asked to provide fingerprints and DNA samples, he hesitated and explained that he had been in the neighboring apartment with the landlord while Joanna was away, which might have accidentally left his DNA. Vincent took a long time to agree to provide the samples for comparison. His profile showed a partial match with the DNA found on the body of Joanna, but there was a significant issue. A quality DNA sample from Joanna could not be obtained because she had been lying by the roadside in the snow for a week, which exposed her body to the elements. As a result, the samples were badly damaged and contaminated, meaning that even a partial match with Vincent could not definitively prove he was the murderer. Nonetheless, this information raised serious suspicions in the police investigation, prompting the authorities to investigate Vincent's background more thoroughly. Vincent Tabak was born on February 10, 1978. At the time of Joanna's murder, he was 32 years old. He was originally from the Netherlands and was the youngest of 5 children. As a child, Vincent was quiet and shy, more introverted than many of his peers, but he was also very intelligent and ambitious. In 2003, he graduated from a technological university in the Netherlands with a master's degree in landscape design, a field he shared with Joanna and hoped to pursue further. In 2007, Vincent moved to the United Kingdom and began working as an engineer. That same year, he met Tanya, and they later moved to Bristol, renting an apartment in the house of Christopher. The landlord had a positive impression of him, as Vincent was calm, friendly, and had no criminal record, which convinced Christopher to provide him with housing. On January 20, 2011, 32-year-old Vincent Tabak was arrested on suspicion of murder. He consistently denied his guilt and maintained his original story. However, during multiple meetings with detectives, he repeatedly changed his statements, adding new details. Initially, he claimed he had stayed home that evening until leaving to pick up his girlfriend Tanya at 2 a.m. Later, he claimed that he had actually left the house twice that night to take photographs and go to the supermarket. Vincent was insistent only in his statement that he did not kill Joanna. It became clear that he was lying and trying to evade responsibility. The police identified the car Vincent was driving and scrutinized footage from street surveillance cameras to track the routes the murderer might have taken when disposing of the victim. Detectives were not surprised to find Vincent's car appearing along nearly the entire route. The car was seized and examined. Numerous pink fibers, matching those found on Joanna's clothing, were discovered in the trunk. These fibers were mixed with fibers from Vincent's own clothing. The most significant evidence found by forensic specialists was blood stains in the trunk. Testing revealed that this blood also belonged to Joanna. It was clear that the perpetrator had attempted to clean the car of any evidence. There was a strong smell of cleaning products, but he had not done a thorough job. Detectives confiscated Vincent's laptop and mobile phone for examination. The analysis showed that his attack had been driven by abuse desire from the start. The laptop contained numerous images and videos, along with browser searches for depraved content. Vincent preferred methods such as strangulation and beatings, which aligned with how Joanna was murdered. He was also a regular visitor to escort websites and met escort in person. It came to light that Vincent was living a double life. He appeared to be a decent man and Tanya's fiancé, while privately he harbored dark secrets. After the murder, a large number of search queries were discovered that revealed Vincent was looking for information about Joanna. He was closely monitoring the investigation, and detectives observed a troubling detail. After checking the progress regarding Joanna's death, Vincent seemed to take pleasure in reliving his actions. This behavior indicated that he could be a potential serial killer, likely to kill again once the thrill of his past victim faded. The investigation uncovered incriminating evidence, including searches related to murder and the decomposition of human bodies. On January 22, 2011, Vincent Tabak was charged with first-degree murder. Although he initially denied his involvement, he later confessed, but insisted that he never intended to kill Joanna. He claimed his actions were accidental and not premeditated. In October 2011, hearings commenced. However, the judge prohibited the prosecution from using the defendant's obsession with violent and abuse content as evidence. In court, Vincent chose to represent himself and delivered his final statement. He recounted that on the evening of December 17, 2010, he was alone in his apartment since his girlfriend had gone to a Christmas party with her colleagues. When he returned from the store, he noticed his neighbor, Joanna, waving at him from her window and inviting him inside. Once inside, Joanna offered him some cider. Vincent misinterpreted her welcoming gesture and believed it indicated a desire for intimacy, which led him to kiss her suddenly. Joanna reacted immediately by screaming and pushing him away. In a state of panic, Vincent covered her mouth and wrapped his hands around her neck in an attempt to silence her. He claimed he held his hand on her neck for about 20 seconds before realizing that Joanna was no longer alive. Vincent insisted that there was no abuse motive behind his actions, viewing it merely as a misunderstanding and a tragic accident. In court, the defendant pretended to feel remorse, but it seemed insincere. The prosecution argued that his version of events was just another lie, especially since it did not account for the 43 injuries the victim had sustained. Joanna even had a broken nose, which suggested a lengthy struggle and significant force. The prosecution believed that the 20 seconds of strangulation he described was far too short. They thought he had been observing her for a long time and intentionally entered her apartment that night when he knew she would be alone, likely after overhearing a conversation between Greg and Christopher. It appeared that Vincent had long-standing feelings for Joanna and knew her better than he let on. He had initially intended to abuse and kill her, as shown by his fetishes for strangling women. Being a strong young man, he easily overpowered Joanna, who was 30 centimeters shorter than him, and he used his full weight against her during the struggle. She sustained injuries to her head, neck, torso, and arms, indicating that the fight was drawn out and her death was slow and painful. He continued to put himself in a compromising situation after the crime by taking the victim's pizza. This is the only reason why neither the pizza box nor its contents were found, even though the receipt was found in the apartment. It's possible that blood or his fingerprints were on the box, prompting him to throw it away along with the food. At 9:25 p.m., Vincent texted his girlfriend Tanya, claiming he was bored at home without her. This was an obvious attempt to create an alibi while he was far from bored at that moment. After sending the message, Vincent loaded the victim's body into his car trunk, stopped at a store to buy beer and chips, and then drove to a different location to dispose of the body. The prosecution reiterated to the jury that Vincent Tabak was a dangerous criminal who could not be trusted. On October 26, 2011, during the closing arguments, the jury began their deliberations, which lasted for 2 full days. On October 28, they returned with a verdict, finding Vincent Tabak guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 20 years. However, his legal troubles did not end there. In March 2015, he was charged with possessing child abuse. With 145 illegal images found on his laptop, he pleaded guilty once more and received an additional 10-month sentence. Following Vincent's conviction, Christopher Jeffries sought justice for the damages he had incurred. He filed defamation claims against several newspapers for harming his reputation. These publications, which had published 8 articles about the case, eventually apologized to Christopher. As a result, they were ordered to pay significant financial compensation for the reputational and moral damages caused. In 2014, ITV releasing a 2-part series titled The Lost Honor of Christopher Jeffries. This series focuses on the former teacher who was affected by the murder of a girl who had rented an apartment from him. The case of Leslie Reeves. On November 20, 2021, Leslie Reeves and Chris Smith met at a bar where Chris was performing as the lead singer of a band. After their initial meeting, Chris invited Leslie back to the bar for a friendly get-together. What started as a casual dinner quickly turned into something more, as they both felt a strong attraction to each other. They met again on November 24, 2021, just before Thanksgiving, at their favorite bar. The bar was packed, but they had made reservations. Those who were there that night remembered Chris and Leslie as a fun couple, full of laughter and conversation, with no signs of conflict between them. Leslie and Chris then got ready and went to his house. Leslie felt comfortable being alone with Chris, as he had made a positive impression on her. Additionally, Leslie was very good at defending herself, which made her feel safer when visiting him. Chris lived on a farm 100 kilometers away from the bar in Farmer City, Illinois, USA. At around 10 p.m., Leslie sent her friend Nanette Stuber a text message saying that something was wrong, but she did not provide any further details. Coincidentally, Nanette was asleep at the time and did not read the message until the next morning. This turned out to be the last message sent by Leslie Reeves. When Nanette woke up, she was eager to talk to Leslie about her date with Chris. Instead, she was alarmed to see Leslie's disturbing message. Nanette texted back asking what had happened, but Leslie did not respond and ignored all attempts to contact her. This lack of communication made Leslie's friend even more worried. Fortunately, Leslie had shared Chris's address, so Nanette decided to go there to check on her. She headed toward Farmer City while also calling the police. Knowing that the trip would take over an hour, she planned to request a welfare check on Leslie. As Nanette approached the farm, she saw another car parked nearby. It belonged to Chris's friend, who had been trying to contact the band's lead singer and wanted to check on him. They decided to explore the area around the house and look inside. As they approached from behind, they noticed that the door was broken and there was a shattered window. Looking inside, they saw a foot on the floor. Chris's friend quickly ran to his car, grabbed his phone, and called emergency services to report a dead body in the house. When the police arrived, they discovered even more heartbreaking scenes. Chris was the first to be brought out. He was alive but severely injured, covered in blood and struggling to breathe. Doctors feared he might not survive the trip to the hospital. The second victim, a woman who had accompanied him from the bar, was taken out. Chris was a local celebrity, the lead singer of a band. Forensic investigators and the sheriff began their work at the farm, while Nanette waited outside in her car. Confused and anxious, she tried to figure out what had happened to her friend, but no one would provide information about Leslie. Overcome with anxiety, Nanette went to the police to share vital information. She explained that the night before Thanksgiving, Leslie had gone on a date with a man named Chris, the first person to be taken from the house. When the police asked to see a photo of her friend, Nanette showed them the pictures on her phone. Then the police delivered the heartbreaking news Leslie had been shot and was dead. However, Chris was still alive but in critical condition and was rushed to the medical center for surgery. Although his condition had stabilized slightly, it was still serious. Police conducted a thorough search of the crime scene, Chris's car, and his personal belongings. They focused particularly on the communication equipment in the home. The scene revealed numerous damaged items, including a broken back door, shattered windows, and a displaced refrigerator. An overturned table and scattered chairs indicated a struggle. Initially, police believed that Chris had attacked Leslie in his own home, leading to a fight that left both of them injured. Leslie died almost instantly, making Chris a suspect. However, further investigation revealed that no weapon was found at the crime scene, which raised suspicions. It appeared that the attacker had been armed. The police concluded that Chris was unlikely to be the attacker, as neither Leslie nor Chris had weapons. Additional findings confirmed that Chris did not attack Leslie. A burned pizza was found, indicating that the couple had planned to cook and eat dinner together that evening before the attack. Evidence suggested that the attacker had come to their home and that they had attempted to defend themselves. Chris was shot first while Leslie fought back. The chaos around her suggested a struggle. She had been shot once in the head, resulting in her death. Police discovered 2 silver bullet casings from a 9mm handgun, one in the kitchen near Chris's body and one in the living room next to Leslie's. To piece together what had happened, police began investigating Leslie and Chris's backgrounds. Chris Smith was a friendly 48-year-old man who had been divorced less than a year before the shooting. Chris worked in pool construction and also played music with his band. He was known in the community as a kind and dedicated person who devoted himself to singing. Almost everyone recognized him by name and face. He had no legal problems, no history of violence, drug use, or involvement in criminal activity. Leslie believed Chris would be the ideal partner for family life. At the time, Chris lived in a large house in a nearby town with his mother and sister. They described him as a workaholic, spending all of his free time focused on his career. The family was close and deeply saddened by what happened to Chris. They had a dog named Tiki, who doctors said played a key role in Chris's survival that night. During the 12 hours Chris bled out before he was discovered, Tiki lay on top of him, keeping him warm. Experts believe the dog sensed Chris's distress and helped him through the situation. Leslie Reeves, a 40-year-old mother of 2, lived about an hour south of Farmersville. She was divorced and had a master's degree in engineering. However, she chose a different path and became a Pilates and women's self-defense instructor. Leslie was very active and used her social media channels to promote her work. When the police asked about potential suspects in Leslie's attack, Nanette provided the most valuable information. Nanette knew Leslie well and recalled that one person who had acted inappropriately was her ex-boyfriend, Robert Tarr. Leslie had ended their relationship long before the attack, but Robert responded by stalking her. He became so persistent that she was forced to block him from her emails, text messages, and phone calls. Although Leslie tried to cut off contact, Robert refused to accept her decision. News of the crime spread throughout the area, eventually reaching a close friend of Leslie's who lived near the city. She confirmed what she had heard and identified Robert Tarr as the only person capable of carrying out such an attack. Leslie's close friend quickly contacted the police to report him, and suspicions against Robert continued to grow. Meanwhile, Chris remained in the hospital. X-rays showed that a bullet had entered his brain between the two hemispheres. If it had traveled just 2 mm deeper, he would have died. When his family learned of the incident, his mother and sisters rushed to the medical center to assist him. The trip took 2 hours, during which they were very worried about him. Chris's relationship with Leslie was short-lived and somewhat unexpected, so most of his relatives were unaware of it. While the doctors worked hard, they had to remove part of Chris's skull to access the soft tissues, remove some of the bone fragments that had penetrated his brain, and extract the bullet. It was time to meet Robert Tarr, a divorced father of 3 living in Collinsville. Thanks to Nanette, they were able to contact him and arrange a meeting. From the beginning, Robert did not question why the police were interested in him and agreed to come to the station without a lawyer. Although the deceased's best friend, Leslie, reported that she had broken up with Robert, he insisted that they were still together, although he admitted that their relationship had problems. Robert denied any involvement in the crime, stating that he had never been to Farmersville and did not know Chris Smith. When questioned about his alibi, he recounted his activities the day before Thanksgiving, claiming that he spent most of the day with a friend until 6:30 p.m., after which he returned home and met only his daughter. However, his alibi was not convincing. There were many holes in his story, and no one could confirm his whereabouts at certain times, making it seem as if he was trying to hide something. The shooting occurred at 1 a.m., while Robert insisted that he had been home long before. Robert's daughter, who was brought to the police station and partially supported his account, said that he had come home around 6:30 p.m., left, and returned around 9 p.m. Robert appeared very upset during questioning. He cried and said that he missed Leslie. His daughter was confused about the situation. The police believed he left to follow Leslie and saw her with a new man named Chris. He stayed with his daughter until she went to bed around 10 p.m. However, at around 2:45 a.m., Robert's daughter woke up to noises in the house. Robert was frantically doing laundry and kept saying he couldn't sleep, which raised suspicions. Robert's daughter also mentioned that her father owned a gun. While the two were at the police station, officers searched their home and discovered a gun. When they showed it to Robert's daughter, she realized that her father had used another gun just the day before. The police checked Robert's movements to verify his alibi. They found that he had filled up his gas tank at a gas station near Farmer about 15 to 20 minutes before the murder, and they obtained a receipt as evidence. Robert was caught on surveillance cameras at various locations as he traveled to the city. This evidence contradicted Robert's earlier claims that he had never heard of Farmersville and had never been there. He was eventually arrested after being caught lying, which allowed the police to detain him and prevent him from fleeing. Chris's family was relieved, as they feared the criminal might return to harm the survivor. Just a day after the arrest, more circumstantial evidence against Robert continued to emerge, and the police believed they had the right man. Robert's lawyer quickly appeared on television to discuss the case, asserting his client's innocence. Robert's story changed rapidly. He claimed that at 6:40 p.m., Leslie called him out of the blue, asking for a ride to a friend's house in Farmersville. He said he arrived at 7:30 p.m., dropped Leslie off near Chris's house, and then returned home. He explained his earlier lies by saying that he was afraid of attracting police attention. Robert claimed that he had simply picked up Leslie and left, insisting that he had not shot anyone. However, the timeline did not match his daughter's account. He stated that there was tension between his daughter and Leslie, so he did not want to worry her any further. In contrast, Robert's daughter described Leslie as a kind woman, and they quickly formed a close bond. Meanwhile, Robert's web of lies continued to grow. He attempted to challenge the police's theories while speaking to reporters, arguing that the police had found no glass or blood in the car he was driving. nor was there any other evidence linking him to the murders. Additionally, no DNA samples from the victims were found at the crime scene or in his car. Robert's defense attorneys used these points to support their case. The police desperately needed physical evidence. Ideally, a pistol containing the bullets used in the crime to conduct ballistics testing. Unfortunately, their initial search was unsuccessful. However, a few days later, Robert's daughter contacted the police, stating that she had found the gun he used in the attack. The weapon was safely stored in a thick Ziploc bag and hidden in the yard, possibly to prevent rain damage, suggesting that the perpetrator intended to use it again. The bag contained numerous fingerprints belonging to Robert, making the discovery significant to the investigation. Despite this evidence, Robert maintained his innocence and attempted to manipulate the facts. Although there were numerous fingerprints on the Ziploc bag, there were none on the gun itself, indicating that Robert had attempted to clean it. However, he was not clever enough to dispose of it. Further analysis revealed that he had not cleaned the gun properly, as tiny drops of Leslie's blood were found on it. To justify himself, Robert began telling a story that the gun actually belonged to Leslie, and that she had asked him to hide it. He claimed that Leslie had learned how to use a gun. However, her shooting instructor, a friend of Leslie's, refuted Robert's story, stating that he had never seen the weapon with her. Leslie's friend insisted that Leslie did not carry a gun for self-defense on that date. If she had had a gun with her, the attacker would not have been able to leave alive. She would have been able to defend herself. Despite everything, Robert maintains his innocence. The outcome depends on the survivor's memory. Chris Smith, the prosecution's main witness, survived the brutal attack, but remains in a drug-induced coma. Doctors report some positive progress, but it is too early to make any predictions about his recovery. While waiting for Chris to regain consciousness, Robert's cellmate approached the police with a disturbing confession. He revealed that Robert tried to hire him as a hitman to kill Chris Smith and the chief prosecutor for $110,000, even paying $10,000 up front. In response, security at the hospital was increased. Investigations were conducted thoroughly, but no evidence supporting the attack was discovered. Robert claims that he never considered hiring a hitman. He stated that he gave $10,000, but it was to bail out a friend. However, this raises the question of why Robert would hand over such a large sum to someone he barely knew. Regardless, Robert's situation only worsened. To clarify the matter, they had to wait until Chris regained consciousness. Thankfully, he opened his eyes in early January 2022, about 2 months after the attack. This marked the beginning of his long recovery process. Chris had to relearn basic skills such as walking, eating, and talking. He approached the rehabilitation process with determination, demonstrating strong physical abilities from the start. Unfortunately, his cognitive recovery did not go smoothly. After waking from the coma, he faced significant memory gaps, especially regarding the night of the attack. He couldn't even remember who Leslie was, or recall anything about that evening. Additionally, Chris had to live with a bullet lodged in his brain. Doctors couldn't remove the bullet due to the risks involved. They found that attempting surgery could cause damage to the surrounding area, potentially leading to serious consequences. As he continued to deal with memory issues, Robert's trial was set for April 2024. At the start of the hearing, prosecutors claimed that Robert had intentionally gone to Chris's house to kill Leslie Reeves after seeing them together that evening. Evidence showed that he had been following Leslie throughout the night, suspecting she was with someone else. When he discovered that she was dating a new man, he became extremely angry. Police found numerous text messages between him and his best friend, in which Robert frequently expressed his frustration with Leslie, particularly that evening. It was evident that he was affected by the situation. Until the very end, he still believed he was in a relationship with her and viewed Leslie's date with Chris and their trip home as a betrayal. After witnessing how happy Leslie and Chris were together, Robert returned home. where his daughter found him crying. Knowing that the couple had gone to Farmersville, he grabbed a gun and went to Chris's house. Robert entered through the back door, but was quickly spotted, leading to an attempt to stop him. A struggle ensued, resulting in a broken window. Robert then armed himself. Leslie and Chris attempted to defend themselves by pushing the refrigerator to block their path. Unfortunately, their efforts were in vain. Chris tried to shield Leslie but was shot, and shortly after, Leslie suffered the same fate. Robert's attorneys attempted to counter the prosecutor's claims. The defense emphasized the lack of direct evidence, portraying the case as a fabrication. They argued to the jury that the investigation was focused solely on accusing Robert of assaulting two people. In fact, there was no evidence at the crime scene directly linking Robert to the crime. Chris, a key witness, could not recall the events of that night and chose not to attend the trial, claiming that he did not remember anything. The prosecution's strongest evidence was a container found at Robert's home that held the bullets used in the attack on Leslie and Chris. Furthermore, Robert was responsible for packing and hiding the gun. He chose not to testify, which his attorney described as a strategic move. Additionally, the defense did not present any witnesses. After hearing the arguments, the jury deliberated for 3 hours and reached a unanimous verdict, finding Robert Tarr guilty of first-degree murder and attempted first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 85 years in prison, eligible for parole after 72 years, meaning he will likely spend the rest of his life behind bars. At this point, Chris finally took the stand in court and spoke about the impact the shooting had on him and his family. This tragic event completely destroyed Chris's life. At 49, he was never able to return to his beloved construction job. While he was in the hospital, his home was completely looted, and even his swimming pool was stolen. After his release, he auctioned off his home, which was later demolished, leaving only an empty lot. He now bore the responsibility of providing for his family. Friends and family remain hopeful that Chris Smith can rebuild his life, but there is a strong possibility that he will never be the same again. While waiting for his memory to improve, he practices every day and learns to do without assistance. Eventually, Chris regained his position as the lead singer in his band. However, the after effects of that senseless attack continue to haunt him as he recovers. The left side of his body remains paralyzed, and he has sought help from a leading medical research center. Chris is eager to participate in advanced research to aid his recovery. He is currently writing a book about his experiences, focusing on domestic violence. Leslie's children are in the care of her ex-husband. The case of Dustin Duthie. Dustin Duthie grew up in a large family, with both biological and half-siblings from his mother's and stepfather's previous marriages. His mother, Shawn Boschuk, separated from his biological father when Dustin was 3 years old. Despite this, his stepfather, Alan Penny Legion, became a loving and supportive father figure. Dustin was especially close to his younger half-brother, Adam. From a young age, Dustin was recognized as being very intelligent, and his family had high expectations for his future. They believed he would achieve great things. However, as Dustin grew older, he often argued and fought with his relatives, and these conflicts frequently escalated from verbal disagreements to physical altercations. Although his family tried to help him manage his anger, it became clear that Dustin struggled to control his emotions. His arguments became increasingly violent, and he began throwing objects at others as a way to release his frustration. Over time, his parents began to tolerate his behavior and often gave in to his demands to avoid further conflict. This approach allowed Dustin to manipulate his family, especially his mother, Shawn, who frequently gave in to him. His manipulative and violent tendencies continued throughout his teenage years. Dustin's behavior eventually led to legal trouble. At the age of 16, he was arrested for the first time after breaking into his school with friends. Together, they vandalized the vice principal's office, smashed a vending machine with a stolen golf club, and stole various items. Despite this incident, Dustin showed no signs of changing his behavior. As Dustin grew older, he became a burden to his family, causing pain and frustration for his parents. His rude and aggressive behavior did not improve with age. In an attempt to control his anger, Dustin took boxing classes, but this effort proved unsuccessful. Adam experienced this firsthand during a training session when Dustin's aggression led to illegal strikes that violated the rules of boxing. Fortunately, the coach intervened before Dustin could harm his younger brother. That day, Adam truly understood how dangerous his brother was. The only person who could stand up to Dustin was their stepfather, Alan, which caused tension between the two. During his teenage years, Dustin had many friends and even a few girlfriends. As both Adam and Dustin entered adulthood, they actively pursued relationships. During this time, Adam met and fell in love with a girl named Taylor Toller. However, tensions arose when Adam noticed Taylor growing closer to Dustin, leading to a minor conflict between the two brothers. Adam found out that Taylor and Dustin were dating. Although he felt sad about it, he chose to accept and support their relationship. When Taylor began dating Dustin, she was 20 years old. Taylor, the only daughter in her family, had grown up happily, surrounded by loved ones and many friends. After graduating from high school, Taylor's gentle and kind nature led her to feel drawn to working with children. In contrast, Dustin was very different from Taylor. He often communicated in a rough and abrasive manner, even with her. Their relationship was frequently tense and filled with conflict. Taylor and Dustin's friends noticed that the couple constantly argued. Despite this, Taylor did not leave Dustin. Perhaps she believed he would eventually change or that she could help him improve. Their complicated relationship dragged on for years, but Dustin's inability to control his anger only made things worse. The situation became even more strained due to frequent arguments with Dustin's family. These conflicts escalated to the point where Dustin physically assaulted his younger brother, Adam, and his stepfather, Alan. Boxing played a significant role in shaping Dustin's behavior. Whenever he felt angry, frustrated, or dissatisfied, he would hit the gym and train harder. It was during this time that Dustin began using steroids. Steroids are widely known to cause side effects such as anger, irritability, and aggressive behavior. Dustin's friends and family repeatedly urged him to stop using the drugs and even suggested that he seek professional help, but he ignored their advice. In the weeks and months that followed, his anger issues worsened. At one point, Dustin attempted to attack his stepfather, Alan, with a metal bar. At family dinners, threats and yelling became commonplace. One evening, however, Dustin's behavior became so unbearable that he was asked to leave. He stood up, walked toward the door, but before leaving, he turned back to his family and said, "You will get what you deserve," before storming out. The family had grown accustomed to Dustin's behavior. These behaviors had become a regular part of their lives. At the time, no one truly believed he would act on any of his threats. However, years of unchecked behavior and lack of intervention were about to take their toll. Everything would come to a head in the summer of 2018. On the morning of Tuesday, July 31, 2018, Adam began his day as usual with a cup of coffee. While sipping his coffee, he realized he hadn't heard from his brother Dustin or the rest of the family in days. Feeling concerned, Adam tried calling Dustin, but his calls went straight to voicemail. He continued trying to reach his brother, but all attempts were unsuccessful. Before he could dwell on it further, Adam received a surprise call from the police. They asked to meet him at his home to discuss an urgent matter. When Adam pressed for details, the officer explained that it was not something they could discuss over the phone. When the police arrived, they shared news that would change Adam's life forever. They informed him about a phone call Dustin had made to the police. During the call, Dustin confessed to killing his girlfriend a week earlier, as well as his stepfather and mother. According to the police, Dustin had been sitting downstairs with a knife and a bottle of whiskey, unable to bring himself to go upstairs and face what he had done. The police rushed to Taylor's home in Elmwood Park, where they discovered her body. Dustin was arrested shortly after making the call and did not resist arrest. Forensic evidence and Dustin's confession revealed that Taylor had been killed 5 days before Dustin murdered his parents. Taylor's body was found in her bed. According to Dustin, the two had argued and fought throughout the night. At around 3 a.m., he strangled her. However, the actual cause of death was determined to be a deep cut to her throat. After her death, Dustin pulled the covers up to her chin. 2 hours later, at around 5 a.m., Dustin left Taylor's apartment and returned to his parents' house, trying to suppress the memory of what he had done. Incredibly, he attempted to act as if nothing had happened for the next few days. The situation changed when Taylor's parents called Dustin's parents. Taylor had been the one in regular contact with her family, so her sudden silence raised concerns. The call alarmed Dustin's parents, who had known Taylor for over 5 years. During this time, Dustin's parents repeatedly tried to get him to talk, suspecting that he might know something about Taylor's disappearance. Despite their persistence, Dustin insisted that he knew nothing. Dustin claimed that he had spoken to Taylor 3 days before her disappearance, but maintained that he had no idea what might have happened to her. However, his parents seemed to believe he was hiding something, and their constant questioning made Dustin realize that the truth would soon come out. Feeling desperate, he concluded that the only way to keep Taylor's disappearance a secret was to make his parents disappear as well. While contemplating how to carry out his plan, Dustin was in the kitchen with his mother, who was sitting at the table sorting some papers. At that moment, he once again lost control of his actions. According to the police report, Dustin's mother, Shawn, had been attacked with a knife, and her body was dragged across the kitchen floor in an attempt to hide it. His stepfather, Alan, was also murdered by Dustin, suffering multiple stab wounds. Both bodies were placed under a plastic tarp, and the surrounding area was hastily cleaned. During the investigation, police discovered a pile of hair in the bathroom. They later determined that Dustin had shaved his head to alter his appearance, possibly in an attempt to escape and hide. However, he ultimately failed to follow through with this plan. After killing his parents, Dustin drove to Taylor's apartment, but was unable to get inside because he had lost the remote control key. Frustrated, he drank whiskey, smoked cigarettes, and pondered his next move. With nowhere to go, no way to dispose of the body, and no plan to cover his tracks, Dustin decided to call 911. Initially, he was incoherent, appearing confused and uncertain about his actions. The experienced police officers kept him talking instead of ending the call, encouraging him to share more details. Dustin eventually confessed to killing his parents earlier that day. The police redirected the conversation, asking about his condition, whether he had been drinking, and whether he had a weapon. They stayed on the line, urging him to surrender peacefully and without resistance. Meanwhile, officers were dispatched to arrest him. Although the investigation appeared straightforward, it took police more than 2 years to gather and analyze all the evidence needed to present the case in court. It was determined that Taylor had been killed in the early morning hours of July 26, 2018. Surveillance camera footage showed Dustin and Taylor entering and leaving the apartment at different times, sometimes holding hands. The evening before the murder, Taylor was seen returning to the apartment alone, visibly upset and crying. The couple was later seen having an emotional discussion. At 5:15 a.m., Dustin was seen leaving the apartment alone, carrying a large box. He then removed the box and a black bag from his car. Inside the box is Taylor's towel. After Dustin was arrested, he was taken to a local hospital for observation because he appeared to be mentally unstable. After undergoing evaluations, he was determined to be mentally competent to stand trial. A key piece of evidence was later discovered by Dustin's younger brother in the back seat of Alan's car. It was a letter torn into small pieces, crumpled, and wrapped in duct tape. Experts painstakingly reconstructed the letter, which turned out to be Dustin's confession. In it, he described his thoughts and feelings after killing Taylor, admitting that he had always been curious about what it felt like to kill someone and to feel someone's soul leave their body. How this letter ended up in his stepfather's car remains a mystery, but it played an important role in building Dustin's psychological profile. A psychological evaluation determined that Dustin was suffering from a mental disorder at the time of the crimes. However, the disorder was caused by his use of illegal drugs and steroids, which impaired his ability to understand the nature, consequences, and illegality of his actions. The findings, evidence, and confessions of Dustin built a strong case against him. 3 years after the murders of Taylor Toller, Sean Boshuk, and Alan Penny Legion, Dustin Duthie's trial began. However, just 3 days before the trial, Dustin pleaded guilty to all 3 counts, bringing the case to a close. Dustin Duthie was convicted of second-degree murder for the deaths of his mother, Taylor, and Sean, as well as first-degree murder for the murder of his stepfather, Alan. During the trial, several people testified, including Dustin's grandmother and siblings, who shared the pain of losing their mother and stepfather. Many others present in court spoke in support of Taylor. Taylor's mother emotionally stated that their family had been a close-knit one, and now they live with nightmares and trauma. They will never forgive Dustin for taking their daughter's life. Dustin was also given the opportunity to speak. He said that he would not ask for forgiveness because he knew what he had done was unforgivable. If he could sacrifice his life to bring back those 3 beautiful souls, he would do it. The prosecution emphasized that Dustin killed his mother and stepfather while sober. By law, Dustin was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 35 years. The sentence includes 25 years for the murders of his stepfather, Alan, and his mother, Sean, as well as an additional 10 years for the murder of his girlfriend, Taylor. While the loss is irreparable, the family feels that justice has been served and that Dustin will face the consequences of his actions. The deaths of Sean and Alan have had a profound impact on their children. One of their sons, Adam, has said that the loss of his parents shattered his dream of pursuing a football career. Another son has expressed his grief over Dustin's actions. Sean and Alan were loving, supportive parents who gave Dustin many opportunities to turn his life around and stood by him and their other children. It is a great tragedy that such a betrayal came from their own son. Although Dustin has apologized and could be eligible for parole after 35 years, many believe he should stay behind bars for life. The case of Mary Catherine Edwards. Before the advent of modern DNA research techniques, building a criminal database was challenging, making the investigation and tracing of crimes less effective. However, recent technological advances have led to the development of sophisticated tools that can help identify criminals who have been on the run for years. Now, no one can evade justice. On January 14, 1995, the Edwards family had a planned gathering. Saturday dinners together were a cherished tradition for the parents and their 2 daughters. So, when one of the twin sisters, Mary, was missing, it raised immediate concerns. Mary Catherine, 31, did not attend the dinner and did not answer calls from her family members who were trying to reach her from the restaurant. Frustrated, they decided to go to Mary's home in Beaumont, Texas, where she was living at the time. When Mary's mother arrived at the house, she became worried upon finding the door unlocked. Inside, they heard running water but received no response to their calls. The bathroom was flooded, and Mary was discovered unresponsive in distressing conditions. Her sister, Allison, immediately called the police to report that she had found Mary's lifeless body. The sisters were twins, raised in Texas, and were the only children in the Edwards family. The loss of one was a devastating shock. They had always been inseparable, kind-hearted, and dedicated to helping others, especially children. After graduating high school, both sisters pursued careers as teachers and worked at the same school. They were so similar that students and faculty often confused them. At the time of her death, Mary was 31 years old and thriving in her career. Known for her bright personality, her murder sparked widespread outrage and anger. Mary was cherished by her students, many of whom felt a close bond with her. Hundreds of children, relatives, and friends attended her funeral, with many students mourning the loss of a woman who had been a vital source of support in their challenging lives. Some were in tears upon hearing the news of her passing. Parents urged detectives to take action against the criminal responsible for the brutal death of Mary. The community was horrified by the circumstances surrounding her death. Mary was found handcuffed in the bathroom, indicating that she had been abused. The bathtub was filled with blood, showing that she had fought back against her attacker, as evidenced by defensive wounds on her hands and body. Traces of the assault suggested that it occurred in her bedroom, where evidence was found on the bedding. Investigators suspected that Mary might have known her attacker, as there were no signs of forced entry into her home. The townspeople, who knew Mary well, cooperated with detectives, eager to identify the person responsible for such a horrific crime. Given the brutality and circumstances, detectives focused their investigation on her close acquaintances, believing there could be a personal motive. It was initially thought that Mary might have drowned, but an autopsy revealed that her lungs did not contain enough water, suggesting that water only entered her lungs after she had died. The true cause of death was asphyxiation, as indicated by distinct marks on her neck, and injuries suggesting she had been tightly restrained with great force until she could no longer resist. Forensic experts meticulously reconstructed the crime scene by examining the victim's house, starting with the bathroom and then moving to the bedroom. They collected a significant amount of evidence. The most alarming item found was the Smith & Wesson handcuffs that the victim had been restrained with, which resembled those used by police. This discovery left law enforcement officials confused, raising suspicions about whether someone connected to the police or a security worker might have had a personal relationship with the victim. The emotional impact of the case was deeply felt by everyone involved. In the weeks following the crime, detectives attempted to trace the serial number of the handcuffs, but their efforts were unsuccessful. By this time, the primary suspect had shifted to David Perry, the ex-boyfriend of Mary. Even though Mary was attractive and sociable, she maintained a small circle of close friends and had a few ex-lovers. She dedicated most of her time to her work and her students, leaving little room for a personal life. It was discovered that David Perry was the only person who might have had keys to her house. This raised concerns that he could have been stalking her and visiting her home out of jealousy or revenge. David agreed to cooperate with the police and provide everything needed for the examination. While waiting for the results, detectives interviewed mutual acquaintances of the couple, and everyone described David as a completely harmless person, showing no signs of aggression. He had no prior criminal record, history of violent or abuse offenses. Additionally, David Perry presented solid evidence of his alibi. He was not even in town on the night of the murder, as confirmed by multiple witnesses. David fully cooperated with the investigation, voluntarily provided DNA samples, and did not exhibit any characteristics of a criminal. Forensic analysis confirmed that the DNA did not match, leading to his removal from the list of suspects. Unfortunately, that was where the investigation stalled. Others in the victim's close circle also did not fit the criminal profile and had solid alibis. Although investigators had a lot of materials for analysis, the forensic technology at the time was insufficient to make further progress. The unsuccessful search continued for years. The situation changed significantly 23 years later, in 2018, with the introduction of a DNA analysis method that utilized genealogy. This method allowed investigators to find potential matches by examining relatives of the suspected. Law enforcement turned to the GetMatch program, which collects DNA from Americans who voluntarily submit their samples, creating a large database. This database was instrumental in solving long-standing unsolved cases. When Detective Brandon Bess was advised to revisit the old cases, he immediately recalled the unsolved murder of Mary Edwards, which had troubled him for years. In April 2020, DNA samples from the scene related to Mary were sent to a lab at Othram for analysis. Here, many matches were found with the relatives of the killer. This marked the beginning of building a family tree related to the suspect. The number of names that needed analysis was overwhelming, totaling several thousand individuals. At this point, the detective's wife, who had a keen interest in genealogy, decided to assist with the investigation. She dedicated her free time to carefully examining matches from this extensive list. This task required precision, as each name needed to be evaluated accurately to ensure their efforts were worthwhile. Additionally, the investigators reviewed the diaries of Mary. It was believed that the victim may have had an obsessive admirer who harmed her out of unrequited love. Despite a thorough examination of the diary entries following the crime, no significant leads were uncovered. They then chose to cross-reference the names mentioned in the diaries with those in the genealogical records. During this process, the surname Lapointe began to come to light. The first identified relative of the murderer was Shara Lapointe. When contacted, Shara revealed that she is a well-known expert in genealogy and genetics. With decades of experience in her field, Shara had previously worked on challenging cases. Notably, she successfully identified one of the women buried along a state highway in the infamous Texas Fields of Death. Now, she was eager to apply her expertise to help solve other crimes, including the mystery surrounding Mary Edwards' death. She was prepared to assist with the investigation, even though it meant examining her own family members, which could lead to unsettling discoveries. As she began her analysis, she felt a sense of dread while checking the backgrounds of her own siblings, aware that the results might have serious implications. She needed to review about 7,500 names. Each individual on this list was examined slowly, requiring her to gather and process information about them and their relatives before either adding them to the family tree or discarding them. This process took several hours for each person. Over 3 months, detectives and Shara Lapointe devoted all their free time to searching for the criminal. Eventually, they found a promising lead, a couple living in Beaumont who matched the profile of the murderer's family. They have 2 sons who attended Forest Park High School, the same school Mary attended as a child. This led to 2 main suspects, Michael Foreman and Clayton Foreman. Michael did not match the age profile for the time of the crime. After checking, he was found to have no criminal record or history of aggressive behavior, so he was quickly ruled out as a suspect. Clayton's situation was different. He had known Mary Edwards from high school and was closer in age to her. Furthermore, he had a criminal record for abuse, making him a strong suspect. In 1981, a 19-year-old girl reported to the police that Clayton Foreman had tied her hands and abused her. The details of that crime were strikingly similar to the incident involving Mary that occurred nearly 15 years later, with the key difference being that the first victim survived. She had also attended Forest Park High School, while Clayton was a manager at that time. The incident was effectively concealed, leading to Clayton receiving a suspended sentence and a fine. At that time, there were no police databases containing DNA samples, and he was not required to provide any. This lack of evidence is why Clayton was not identified during the investigation into the death of Diana Coe, his girlfriend of 3 years, with whom he had been planning to marry. Although Diana described him as a nice guy, it seems she did not truly know him. Less than 3 months before their wedding, she discovered the details of his abuse charge, the suspended sentence, and the fine, prompting her to want to end their engagement. However, Clayton, a manipulative liar, convinced her that it was all a misunderstanding. He avoided discussing the issue but created a believable narrative. Diana, eager to believe him, prioritized her relationship over her safety, which turned out to be a mistake. They went ahead with the marriage despite warnings from her family. When Diana and Clayton were married for just over 11 years, Diana claimed that Clayton frequently lied about his significant financial issues. She also observed that he had an unusual obsession with police handcuffs and law enforcement tools, even hanging a pair of handcuffs from the rearview mirror of his car. By the time Mary was killed, Diana had already divorced Clayton. She recalled calling him in tears to share the news, but she was taken aback by his indifferent response. He continued the conversation as if nothing had happened and then hung up. It became evident that he was likely not overly concerned about the situation. He was probably connected to the events that had transpired. The suspect was now 60 years old and no longer lived in Beaumont. He had been located in a small town called Reynoldsburg, Ohio, which had a population of a few thousand. At that time, Clayton was working as a driver. Investigators were able to find his address and all necessary information. Now they needed to collect his DNA for analysis. They set up surveillance on the suspect's house. A local police officer even took his trash, which was sent to a forensic lab. DNA from Clayton was discovered on a beer bottle found in the garbage. The match was nearly 100%. A significant finding indicated that the investigation was nearly complete after all these years. The next step was to confront the suspect. The detectives in charge of the case traveled to Ohio and devised a plan to lure Clayton into a trap. Since he was a driver, they decided to approach him about a fictitious lost item that a client was supposedly searching for. On April 29, 2021, Clayton was summoned to the police precinct under the pretense of discussing a lost wallet. He agreed to come in voluntarily. For the first time in 26 years since a brutal murder, the suspected perpetrator was in the interrogation room. The detectives informed him about the murder of Mary Edwards. This news shocked him, but Clayton attempted to maintain his composure and initially denied knowing her. The detectives then showed him a wedding photo of his first wife, which included Mary and her twin sister as bridesmaids. This reminded him that Mary had indeed attended his wedding, as his wife had invited her. From the beginning, Clayton became visibly nervous as the detectives bombarded him with questions, revealing inconsistencies in his story. The detectives focused on his vulnerabilities, hoping to obtain a confession. Clayton insisted that he was unaware of Mary's death and claimed he had never been to her house. However, these statements were quickly refuted by his ex-wife. Despite the evidence, Clayton continued to deny any connection to Mary, which seemed to be a defensive reaction. He also denied having had intimate relations with her, but this was proven false when DNA samples matching his were found on her body. The realization that his DNA was discovered on her underwear and body left him bewildered. When he was arrested for the murder of Mary Edwards, he insisted on having a lawyer and stopped cooperating with the investigators. In a symbolic gesture of victory in this long-standing case, Clayton Foreman was handcuffed with the same type of cuffs that had been found on Mary. On March 12, 2024, over 29 years after the murder of Mary, Beaumont prosecutor Patrick Knauth and colleagues Mike Laird, Sonny Eckhart are ready to go to trial. The absence of a lawyer limited his options. Weak attempts to invoke the statute of limitations were unsuccessful. Clayton Foreman remained obstinately silent, neither confessing to the murder nor defending himself in court. For everyone involved in the investigation, emotions ran high. Cheryl LaPointe worried that the Clayton's family would resent her for participating in Clayton's arrest. Nevertheless, she received support, with others expressing concern for her safety leading up to the court hearings. Shara felt it was her duty to uncover the truth behind the cold-blooded murder, regardless of the personal costs. One of the key witnesses for the prosecution was the twin sister of Mary, Allison, who emotionally recounted how Clayton took away the person she loved most. Even after many years, she still bore a striking resemblance to her sister. During the trial, the prosecution brought in experts in genealogy and genetics, along with forensic laboratory specialists, to explain advanced DNA analysis techniques to the jurors. It was crucial to demonstrate that relative matching methods were reliable. The prosecution also focused on women who had been impacted by Clayton's actions. One of his former colleagues testified, sharing her observations of Clayton's unusual interest in police items at work. As his subordinate who handled documents, she often opened his desk drawer and found a pair of handcuffs. Although she found this odd, she didn't feel comfortable asking him about it, thinking it was just one of his quirks. The defendant's last wife shared how she discovered many dress-revealingly photos of underage girls. When she confronted Clayton about them, he responded calmly, saying he needed them to fantasize about taking away their innocence. He then laughed, dismissing it as a failed joke. Despite these disturbing revelations, Clayton continued to evade justice. One of his victims, Diana Coe, also attended the trial. She believed in his guilt and testified for the prosecution. It was during this time that she learned about another victim and realized the full extent of her ex-husband's cruelty. However, she pointed out that during their 11 years of marriage, he did not display such behaviors during their intimate moments and never crossed reasonable boundaries in their relationship. The first victim of Clayton's assault provided a detailed testimony about her experience. At the time, she was 19 years old and just months away from his wedding to Diana. One night, while driving home along a dirt road, her car got stuck. Suddenly, a civilian car pulled up, and a man claiming to be a police officer got out to offer her help. Feeling helpless, she accepted his assistance. However, as she stepped out of her car, he attacked her, tied her hands behind her back, and threatened her with a knife, saying he would slit her throat if she resisted. Clayton abused her. Surprisingly, afterward, he became more gentle, even driving her home. During the ride, he asked her not to cry, tried to comfort her, and expressed remorse for what had happened, claiming he didn't want to hurt her. This sudden shift in his demeanor was unsettling, especially considering the violent behavior he had just exhibited. At that time, she reported the incident to the police, but she was fearful. In court, she mentioned that she had forgiven her attacker and harbored no resentment towards him. She did not wish to harm Clayton. She believed he truly regretted his actions and would not reoffend. This perspective contributed to the light punishment he received. Now the first victim feels guilty, thinking that if Clayton had been imprisoned, it might have prevented the murder of Mary. Additionally, another victim testified against the defendant in court. Previously, she had been too afraid to contact law enforcement. This woman was also a friend of Diana, with whom she had stayed in touch during school. According to her testimony, Clayton attacked her one evening in 2006 while she was living alone in her apartment. Their past friendship allowed her to communicate with him, and he initially appeared to be an ordinary guy until his darker side emerged. One evening, Clayton visited her apartment and revealed that he was struggling financially and having marital issues. He was convincing, expressing a need for someone to understand and listen to him without judgment. Feeling sympathetic, she let him in. However, once she turned her back, he attacked her, held a gun to her head, threatened her, and assaulted her. He also used handcuffs during the attack. After it was over, Clayton surprisingly softened, apologized, and asked her not to report the incident to the police. She was scared, so she did not file charges against him. Following that night, Clayton did not reach out to her at all. It's important to note that his assaults were strikingly similar to a situation that could have occurred with Mary Edwards. Unlike previous victims, however, Mary fought back against his attack. The prosecution's witnesses testified for 7 days, while the defense presented no evidence. The defense attorney claimed that although Clayton might be an abuser, there was no proof that he was also a murderer. The defense suggested that Clayton's limited options might have influenced the situation. They acknowledged incidents involving other women, stating that Clayton typically did not act aggressively towards his wives, except for his fetish involving handcuffs. After hearing the prosecution's arguments, the jurors went to deliberate. They found Clayton Foreman guilty of murdering Mary Catherine Edwards. He received a life sentence. Clayton is eligible for parole in 2061. By then, he will be 101 years old. The jurors stated that it was not merely the testimonies from the traumatized women that led to their decision. Rather, it was the forensic experts' analysis of DNA evidence showing a nearly 100% match with Clayton Foreman's DNA that confirmed their conviction. The experts provided such a thorough explanation of the principles of modern forensic methodologies that it was difficult to find more convincing words. The convict also refused to admit his guilt until the end, even in the face of evidence regarding the abuse. Naturally, against this background, he never revealed the details of his heinous crime. Nevertheless, there remained even more horrifying questions. For many years, Clayton managed to skillfully hide his malicious nature from everyone around him, even from the women he lived closely with. Most people around him had no idea that he was capable of murder. Authorities suspected that he might have been involved in a significantly larger number of bloody crimes that remained unsolved. Clayton Foreman is in state prison. He will be eligible for parole in 2061, of course, if he lives that long. He continues to keep silent, while authorities do not lose hope that he will eventually reveal his secrets. The case of Orville Fleming. Sarah June Douglas was born on August 4, 1987, in Sacramento, California, into a family with 5 siblings. As a child, she was a sweet, sociable, and cheerful girl with a deep love for nature. She had a particular fondness for animals, especially dogs and birds, and enjoyed spending time in the garden planting and caring for plants. However, her teenage years marked a dramatic change. Sarah became rebellious and mischievous, dropped out of school, abandoned her previous hobbies, and began spending most of her time with friends and attending parties. At the age of 19, she entered into a tumultuous relationship with a man and eventually became pregnant. In 2007, at the age of 20, Sarah gave birth to a son. Unfortunately, the child's birth did not resolve the conflicts between Sarah and her boyfriend, and they eventually decided to separate. Sarah had to adapt to life as a single mother with no formal education or career while taking care of her child. Over time, making ends meet became increasingly difficult, as finding a steady job that could support both her and her son proved to be a challenge. Although her mother and sister provided some support, Sarah continued to struggle financially. Eventually, she turned to providing intimate services on escort websites. Her sister described Sarah as a good person who made poor decisions, and this was one of the worst. While Sarah was able to alleviate her financial difficulties, this choice also exposed her to new and far more dangerous problems. After spending a few years working in the escort industry, Sarah met Orville Fleming, who provided financial stability and a secure home. Wanting to ensure a better future for her son, Sarah saw Orville as the salvation she had been hoping for. Orville Fleming, born on June 26, 1958 in California, had lived what appeared to be an exemplary life for over 30 years. He was a husband, father, and a dedicated firefighter with over 24 years of service. Due to his outstanding performance and leadership skills, Orville became a battalion chief. Orville also worked as an instructor at the fire academy. His career was flourishing, and his impeccable record qualified him for a substantial pension. Many considered Orville and Megan Fleming, his wife, who had been married for 30 years, to be the epitome of a successful, typical American couple. Together, they raised 2 children who had grown into responsible, successful adults. However, behind his seemingly perfect life, Orville was hiding a dark secret. A significant portion of his income was spent on one of his private indulgences, hiring escort services that he found on internet platforms. Despite being seen as a devoted husband and a dedicated civil servant in his 50s, Orville sought out intimate encounters with young women. On one of these websites, Orville met Sarah, a 24-year-old attractive young woman. Orville was immediately drawn to her during their first meeting. At the time, Sarah was using a different name on the website and charging $300 an hour for her services. It is said that during their meetings, Sarah gained Orville's trust by sharing stories about her difficult life as a single mother. Moved by her struggles, their relationship quickly developed. Orville became deeply infatuated with Sarah, to the point of obsession. Orville continued to care for Sarah and her son, but he felt that it was not enough. After some time, he suggested that they move in together, promising to leave his wife, marry Sarah, and take care of her child. True to his word, Orville divorced his first wife, Megan, and moved in with Sarah and her son in a house located in a quiet neighborhood in Fox River, south of Sacramento. Sarah shared with her family how happy she was with the changes in her life. Although her parents were initially concerned about the significant age gap between Sarah and Orville, they supported her and believed she had made the right choice. The new house also became a home for birds, as Sarah had loved them since childhood and could now devote her time to caring for them. She had quit her previous job to focus on taking care of Orville and her son. Their plans for marriage began when Orville gave Sarah an engagement ring with a large diamond. However, their relationship soon began to deteriorate. Orville became possessive and extremely jealous. Knowing that Sarah was financially dependent on him, he used this to his advantage to control her and ensure she stayed by his side. After living together for 2 years, Sarah grew increasingly frustrated with her fiancé, who displayed obsessive and controlling behavior. She also frequently clashed with Megan, who was still Orville's legal wife despite him filing for divorce on October 24. Sarah's patience was wearing thin, and she began calling Megan repeatedly, even demanding that Megan pay off Orville's debt for the escort services Sarah claimed to have provided him. As 2014 approached, Orville and Sarah's relationship had deteriorated significantly. Sarah began spending more time with her mother and sister, confiding in them that she was seriously considering ending her relationship with Orville. Little did she know that her decision to leave would lead to a devastating tragedy. On Wednesday, April 30, 2014, Sarah sent her son to stay with his father for a few days and decided to spend time with her mother and sister. The three women went to a casino where they stayed until 11 p.m. During this time, Orville repeatedly called and texted Sarah. Around midnight, Sarah's sister dropped her off at the house she shared with Orville, not realizing it would be the last time she would see her sister alive. When Sarah entered the house, she immediately sensed something was wrong. A strong smell of gas filled the air. She quickly turned off the gas in the kitchen and called her sister, telling her that Orville had left the gas on, possibly in an attempt to harm her birds. While they were talking, Sarah's sister suddenly heard her scream, apparently startled by someone entering the room. Moments later, her sister heard Orville's voice, followed by the sound of arguing and Sarah's terrified scream. Thinking it was just another one of their usual arguments, her sister went to bed, planning to check on Sarah the next morning. The next morning, Sarah's sister tried calling her several times but received no response. At 8 a.m., Sarah's sister and aunt decided to go to her house. They knocked on the door, but no one answered. Noticing that the door was unlocked, they cautiously entered the living room, only to find the house in disarray, with objects scattered everywhere. Feeling uneasy, they went to the master bedroom. What they found there horrified them so much that they ran out of the house in a panic. A neighbor, alarmed by the screams of Sarah's sister and aunt, quickly called 911 to report the incident. By 9 a.m., the police had arrived at the scene. Inside, they immediately noticed signs of a struggle. In the bedroom, they found a body lying face down on the floor next to the bed. The victim had visible stab wounds, and a cloth-like material was tied around her neck. The window shutters were closed, and no one else was in the house. The police quickly secured the area, called in forensic experts to collect evidence, and transported the young woman's body to the morgue. Sarah's sister and aunt were questioned and promptly identified the victim as Sarah June Douglas, 26. An autopsy revealed that Sarah had been attacked with a knife, possibly a kitchen knife. There were also clear signs of strangulation on her neck, along with bruises on her body, which indicated physical violence. Laboratory tests found no traces of alcohol or foreign substances in her system. Police learned from Sarah's sister that she lived with Orville and that their relationship had recently become strained. That night, Sarah had allegedly told Orville that she intended to end the relationship. Using details Sarah's sister overheard during a phone call, police began reconstructing the events that led to Sarah's tragic death. Orville Fleming became the prime suspect in Sarah's murder, leading to an arrest warrant being issued against him. However, Orville disappeared, and efforts to locate him were unsuccessful. A statewide search was conducted, and his official vehicle was found not far from his home, but his whereabouts remained a mystery. During the investigation, police discovered that Orville was in possession of 2 handguns that were missing from the scene. As a result, they warned the public that he was considered armed and extremely dangerous. Flyers were widely distributed, urging people to report any suspicious individuals. The police search continued for several days, with special units involved. Meanwhile, at the house where Sarah had died, relatives, friends, and acquaintances gathered to pay their respects and offer condolences to her family. The media closely followed the search and provided regular updates. On May 2, the police decided to reenact the events of that tragic night. Orville's relatives and colleagues were invited to participate, and those who knew him were shocked by his alleged involvement in such a terrible crime. They had always known him to be a kind, positive, and cheerful person, which made the accusations even harder to believe. A week after Orville disappeared, he was removed from his post due to being absent from work for more than 5 days. Meanwhile, the police redirected their search to remote areas of California where Orville might have traveled. They speculated that, as a nature enthusiast who frequently hiked in hard-to-reach areas, Orville might possess survival skills suited to such environments. During the ongoing search, Orville's wife Megan made a startling revelation. She claimed that Orville and other members of the California Fire Department had used escort services at the fire station. Megan stated that she had seen a video showing firefighters with women, including one identified as Sarah, inside the station's fire truck. However, when police searched the home Orville and Sarah shared, they found no such videos or photos. Megan went on to report that Sarah had been demanding money from her for the past 4 years to pay debts related to intimate services. Megan claimed that the situation escalated after Sarah discovered that the diamond ring Orville had given her was, in fact, a fake. After 2 weeks of intensive searching, Orville, a former fire battalion commander, was finally arrested on May 26, 2014. He was found at a bus stop near the woods where he had abandoned his car, suggesting that he had been hiding in the woods the entire time. When he attempted to catch a bus to get food, he was arrested without resistance. On May 20, 2014, Orville Fleming appeared in court. He claimed that he could not afford a lawyer and refused to plead guilty. 10 days later, the California Highway Patrol announced an investigation into alleged misconduct involving members of the fire department where Orville had worked. In October 2014, 4 months after the murder, Orville formally pleaded not guilty. Sarah's family, particularly her mother, was outraged by Orville's arrogance, as he even winked at his lawyer while proclaiming his innocence. Her family informed the court about Sarah's troubled relationship with Orville, describing him as a jealous and controlling husband who had forbidden her from working. At the same time, an investigation was launched into the fire academy where Orville had been an instructor. On December 29, 2014, evidence of misconduct was uncovered, resulting in the suspension of 16 firefighters. In June 2015, Orville's lawyers began their defense by attempting to portray him in the best possible light. They argued that he was a victim of manipulation by an escort service employee with a history of substance abuse. The defense claimed that the woman had exploited Orville for her own benefit until he reached his breaking point. They also asserted that he had amnesia and could not recall the attack itself. Through this narrative, the defense hoped to secure a reduced sentence. The next day, Orville alleged that Sarah was an alcoholic, used illegal drugs, and frequently yelled at and humiliated him. On the night of the incident, he claimed they had a heated argument, after which he lost control. He stated that he went into the kitchen, grabbed a knife, returned to the room, pinned Sarah down on the bed, and stabbed and strangled her. Orville claimed he could not remember all the details of the incident and later expressed shock, saying he could not believe he had killed the woman he intended to marry. He also revealed that while on the run, he had attempted end life 3 times. Finally, the prosecutor presented their case. During questioning, Orville claimed he did not remember what had happened. However, the police had a recording from his arrest in which Orville clearly confessed that he had stabbed Sarah because she insulted him. The prosecution argued that Orville had sufficient time to comprehend his actions, making him eligible for first-degree murder charges. On June 24, 2015, Orville Fleming was convicted of second-degree murder. On July 31, he was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 16 years. Orville's crime not only deprived Sarah's 5-year-old son of the chance to grow up with his mother, but also exposed him to a media frenzy due to speculation about his mother's past. To shield the boy from public scrutiny and hostility, his father relocated him to Santa Rosa. Sarah's family suffered 2 devastating tragedies. First, Sarah's death shattered their hearts. Then, just months after Sarah's death, her brother, to whom she was very close, took his own life, unable to cope with the immense pain of losing her in such horrific circumstances. For Sarah's family, her death at the hands of a man she had been with for years was a stark warning to end abusive relationships before it was too late. It also highlighted that seemingly respectable and socially respected people can sometimes be far worse than those who are shunned. The case of Laurel Mitchell. Laurel Jean Mitchell was born on May 24, 1958. She grew up in a loving and supportive environment with her 2 younger siblings, raised by their parents. The Mitchell family was very friendly, and many neighbors considered them the ideal American family. Despite the challenges they faced, the family remained close and worked together to overcome difficulties. From an early age, Laurel excelled in school and was part of a very religious family. She attended church regularly, with her parents and later with her siblings. Laurel was also creative and talented. She joined the local choir and practiced weekly. She achieved much success, performing with the choir in neighboring cities and participating in various community events. Committed to helping others, Laurel worked at a church camp near her home. Many of the attendees knew her well, having watched her grow up. Laurel was described as a friendly, positive girl with a gentle yet strong personality. Those close to her believed that she had a bright future ahead, supported by her dedication to her family and community. On the morning of August 6, 1975, Laurel spent time caring for her younger brother and sister while waiting for their parents to return from work. In the afternoon, she was scheduled to go to church camp. Laurel left home around 2 p.m., said goodbye to everyone without incident, and arrived at camp on time, as usual. She was scheduled to work until around 10 p.m. that evening and then planned to go to a local park to relax with friends, which was half a mile from the church. After work, a friend of Laurel's offered to drive her to the park, but she declined, preferring to walk and enjoy the fresh air. About 10 minutes into her walk, she met some friends across the street who were having a good time. Although they waved goodbye, Laurel did not join them because she did not want to be late. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. Meanwhile, her friends were waiting for her at the park. After 20 minutes had passed without Laurel, They began to worry. It was unusual for her to be late, as she was known to be punctual and usually arrived early. Concerned, her friends decided to wait a little longer, thinking that she might simply be running late for church. They waited for her, but after half an hour, they grew impatient and felt a little annoyed by her tardiness. Unable to wait any longer, they decided to go out and have fun without her. Meanwhile, they worried that something might have happened to her. Laurel's family was not worried at first because she had told them that she was going to meet her friends after work and planned to return around midnight, which was her curfew. Her parents allowed her to go out, but as midnight approached and she still had not returned, they began to worry. Both her mother and father became concerned, as did her friends. They realized that Laurel's behavior was unusual. Worried about her well-being, her parents decided to take action instead of waiting. Her mother immediately began trying to find out what had happened to her daughter. Knowing that 17-year-old Laurel was very close to her friends, most of whom lived nearby, her parents decided to contact them despite the late hour, as their worries had grown too great. Laurel's best friend lived right across the street, and they often spent time together. So when Laurel wasn't at her friend's house, her parents were surprised. At that time, her friend had returned home, which raised their concerns. After talking to her friend, Laurel's parents were shocked to learn that she had not gone to the park to meet them, and that they had gone for a walk without her. Her parents searched for Laurel along the path she would have taken, but found no sign of her. They planned to go home, hoping that she would be back by then, but she did not return. Worried, the family began calling everyone they knew who might have seen Laurel despite the late hour. Most people were sympathetic, but unfortunately, no one knew where she was. They eventually decided to call the police to report her missing. Sadly, the police responded with the usual excuses, saying that since Laurel was 17 and was supposed to be with friends, she may have run away due to a conflict with her parents or simply been with someone else. They speculated that she might have had too much to drink and was unable to return home. However, her parents insisted that this behavior was completely out of character for Laurel. Laurel spent most of her time at home and at church, but the police did not listen to their concerns. Determined to find Laurel, her parents and others spent nearly an hour at the police station trying to convince the officers that she would never have missed a meeting with friends or broken curfew. Eventually, the police seemed to take action. By this time, a large group of townspeople were anxious to know what had happened to Laurel. Everyone in the community knew each other, and the idea that a young girl could be in danger in such a quiet town, where nothing like this had ever happened, was shocking. Laurel's parents made a phone call, and a crowd gathered outside the police station, ready to help. Despite the late hour, the people were determined to search for Laurel along with the police. First, they checked the camp near the church, along the route Laurel had taken. However, they found no sign of her along the entire path she might have followed. Then the group split up and searched the city until dawn. But unfortunately, they still found no clues. By 10:30 a.m., the search of the homes of Laurel's friends, whom she was supposed to meet, was nearly complete. The hope that she had simply gone out to have fun had evaporated. Naturally, there was interest in the missing girl's relatives. The Mitchell family had made extensive efforts to identify any potential suspects in Laurel's vicinity. However, they ruled them out, one by one. Laurel had a good social circle, with no signs of cruelty or criminality. Her friends could provide no leads for the investigation. There were no suspicious boyfriends or manipulative individuals in her life, as she had never dated anyone or even thought about boys. There were no jealous suitors who could harm her. Rumors began to spread, and the local community started to pressure the police for answers. Eventually, the police learned that Laurel had met a group of friends about 10 minutes earlier and had passed by them. They reported that they had seen nothing unusual. Laurel seemed happy and was not being followed. So what could have happened to her? A few kilometers north of the city, a man was fishing with his son on the river. Everything seemed calm until he noticed something suspicious floating downstream. Out of curiosity, he decided to row his boat closer. To his horror, he discovered that it was the body of a girl. The man was terrified, thinking that she might have had an accident and drowned. He believed he could still save her, so he pulled her body into the boat and tried to help. However, he soon realized that she was too cold, despite the warm weather. When all his efforts failed, he brought her body to shore with his son. He spotted a passing car and asked the driver to call for help. At the time, Laurel Mitchell's disappearance had not yet been officially reported. Since she had no identification, it was difficult to identify her. The police responded to the call. It turned out that the man and his son were not from the area and did not know Laurel. The police noticed a ring with her initials engraved on her finger. A few hours later, Laurel was officially reported missing, and her initials confirmed her identity. Her parents were able to identify her immediately. Initially, there was an assumption that she may have accidentally fallen off the bridge, slipped, and drowned, possibly due to not knowing how to swim or being intoxicated. However, her parents quickly dismissed these thoughts. They knew that swimming was a regular part of Laurel's training. She had always loved water and enjoyed swimming since childhood, so she could have swum out of the reservoir if she had accidentally fallen in. Additionally, her family and friends confirmed that she had not been drinking. She had not intended to cross the bridge that night, as it was not on her route, making it unlikely that she had accidentally ended up there. Despite this, the police remained skeptical of the family's beliefs. Laurel was found in a large river with a strong current. In some areas, the current is so powerful that even professional swimmers avoid it. According to the police, Laurel may have fallen into the water or gone swimming and become a victim of the current. She may have been swept away and been unable to handle the situation. This theory is supported by the existence of areas marked as too dangerous to swim. Forensic experts were quick to dismiss the police's explanation. Laurel had numerous bruises indicating that she had been beaten, an apparent case of violent death. Many of her injuries appeared to be defensive wounds, particularly on her arms and upper chest. Her face and head were severely injured, suggesting that she had been struck with a blunt object. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma, indicating an attempt to conceal the evidence by dumping her body in the river. The body had been submerged in water for a long time, causing most of the evidence to wash away. The remaining traces could not be thoroughly analyzed because DNA testing was still in its early stages, which caused the investigation to stall. Although the police had some evidence in the form of suspicious biological traces, they were too small to be of any use. All of the items recovered, such as Laurel's clothes, shoes, and underwear that showed these traces, were eventually stored. At the funeral, the church was so crowded that many attendees had to stand outside. People expressed their condolences to Laurel's family and hoped that the case would be solved soon. The investigation soon stalled and only made progress a few months later, when an anonymous witness called the police from a public phone. She claimed to know what had happened to Laurel, but when the police began asking questions, she abruptly hung up and was never found again. The police made a public appeal to find the girl who had called them. They assured her that her identity would be kept confidential and that she would be safe, providing any protection she might need. They urged her to contact them again and share any information she had. To encourage her, they even offered a reward of $50,000, a substantial sum at the time. Despite this, the girl did not call back. Unfortunately, the reward led to trouble, as the police received some false information, wasting resources on unnecessary investigations. 6 months after Laurel's death, a woman contacted the police. She lived across the street from where Laurel had walked to the park that evening. She reported seeing Laurel at 10:15 p.m., the same time she was returning from work. While she was at home, she heard a strange noise outside. It sounded like a car had stopped suddenly in front of her house, followed by the screams of young people. When she looked out the window, she saw one of the trunks slam shut. Laurel, who had disappeared from view for a moment, was seen by a housewife. The housewife noticed a red car with strange young men inside, who quickly drove away. Although she could not see the faces or the license plate, she provided a description of the car. It was a bright red car, quite recognizable at the time. The police were very interested in this information and began investigating all the car owners matching that description. However, for a month, they found no clues, much to the frustration of the police and Laurel's family. The investigation hit a dead end again. Decades later, in the early 2010s, advances in technology and methods, including genetic analysis, allowed for a more thorough examination of the available evidence. Profiling techniques were also used, leading to the creation of a psychological profile of the suspect. FBI agents were even brought in to assist. The profiler suggested that the suspect was likely a young man who lived in or near the area, had a history of violent crime, and possibly a criminal record. Despite these efforts, the investigation into Laurel's case made little progress. The DNA samples from the evidence were too limited to be analyzed comprehensively, hampering the police's efforts to solve the crime. During this time, a team was formed to tackle unsolved cases. Finally, the case of Laurel Mitchell came to the attention of her elderly parents. They once again expressed their desire to confront the brutal criminal who had beaten their innocent daughter to death. The police chose to restart the investigation, ignoring all the controversial conclusions from over 30 years ago. Sadly, Laurel's parents died before the police could answer their long-standing questions. As of 2012, the culprit remains unidentified. After the tragedy, Laurel's brother and sister were determined to continue their fight for justice. They believed that the media could help promote their efforts, so they issued several news reports about the investigation, which had been ongoing for nearly 4 years. A few months into their media campaign, they began to see progress with the police. A woman who had lived in the area in 1975 and was the same age as Laurel came forward to share her story. About a week after Laurel's murder, she had met a man named John Wayne Lehman at a party, and they had begun a long-term relationship. At another party, John confessed to her about a traumatic incident that had occurred that summer. He revealed that he had witnessed his friend attacking a girl on the street and felt helpless because he could not intervene. John gave a detailed account of the crime, but maintained that he did not kill Laurel. Instead, he claimed that it was his friend. At the time, she did not believe him. When she went to the police station and repeated what John had said, the police became interested. The information she provided about the attack and murder included details that had not been reported in the media, raising suspicions. Despite this, the investigation remained challenging. The woman mentioned that she had broken up with John shortly after his confession and that she did not know about his current situation. He was not listed in the police database, indicating that he had no legal problems. The police sought to identify John's friend. The woman struggled to remember her friend's name. To help her recall, the police provided her with a list of former suspects and potential witnesses in the case. She recognized the name Fred Bandy Jr. 2 years after Laurel's death, a young man came to the police station stating that he had met Fred, who had no stable home, job, or education. He described Fred as having an anger problem that he could not control. During one of their meetings, Fred confided in him that a friend named John had attacked a girl on the street for no reason. When the girl fought back, Fred became angry and started hitting her. He continued to attack her even after she passed out and fell to the ground. Fred claimed that he lost control at that point, which ultimately led to the girl's death. To cover up their crime, they dumped the girl's body in the river. At the time, the police did not take the young man's testimony seriously because he could not provide the girl's name, making it impossible to verify his account. Initially, the police ignored the situation, but eventually remembered it. However, they did not take action because they could not verify his testimony. After reviewing the report, the police discovered that John Wayne Lehman and Fred Bandy Jr. were involved in the case. Now, the police decided to take a closer look at the main suspects. However, at this time, they still had no information about John or Fred. Finally, the police had advanced technology that could analyze even the smallest traces. In 2019, they decided to test all the evidence collected from Laurel's murder, including her clothes, shoes, underwear, and a ring. Contrary to expectations, the testing process took nearly a year, even with these improved methods. In February 2020, a major breakthrough occurred when forensic scientists discovered microscopic traces on Laurel's clothing that had gone unnoticed for decades. The authorities had enough samples from Fred, who had a history of violent crimes, and his DNA was stored in a database. They needed time to compare these samples. Unfortunately, the initial results only showed an 80% match, which was not conclusive enough, so the investigation continued. After conducting further analysis using different methods, they achieved a near 100% match with Fred's samples. Finally, in 2023, the decision was made to arrest Fred Bandy Jr. and his friend John Wayne Lehman. Police noted that Fred had a history of 3 violent crimes, all targeting young girls, but he had only been convicted of one of these crimes. Fred served a short sentence and was released. He has now admitted to attacking Laurel Mitchell and mentioned that his friend John owned a red car in 1975. He tried to blame John but could not explain why only his DNA was found on Laurel's body. Both men were arrested nearly 48 years after Laurel's murder. Laurel's younger brother and sister struggled to understand how the killers were able to live freely while the police failed to catch them all these years. It was expected that they would accuse each other. Fred blamed John for everything, while John insisted that Fred was responsible for abusing and killing Laurel and drowning her. He denied any involvement in the murder, claiming that his fear of Fred had prevented him from intervening or speaking up until now. After hearing arguments from both sides, the jury reached a decision. Within an hour, they found Fred Bandy Jr. guilty of first-degree murder. At the time, Fred was 69 years old. At the sentencing hearing that followed, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. It is important to note that Fred was tried under a 1975 law. At that time, he could have faced life in prison with the possibility of parole or the death penalty. However, the death penalty has since been abolished in that state. As a result, Fred will spend the rest of his life in prison. John Wayne Lehman, who was 68 years old when he was arrested in Indiana, negotiated a deal with the prosecution by pleading guilty to conspiracy to commit murder. Because of his cooperation, John was sentenced to only 8 years in prison, with the possibility of parole. In exchange for this leniency, John had to testify for the prosecution during the trial. After the murderers were convicted, Laurel's 62-year-old younger sister released balloons into the sky that read, "We got him." This allowed the family to celebrate a long overdue victory for justice